Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we are talking all about Avatar. Not the Nickelodeon series, The Last Airbender, which honestly a lot of you would probably want us to actually talk about. We're talking about the 2009 James Cameron movie that was the most popular movie, still is, that's ever come out in theaters in terms of just raw box office gross. I know you've all seen it. You might not all remember it, but that is the movie we are talking about today because it did have a theatrical re-release in theaters this week, although both Sean and I just watched it at home. You could go see it in theaters. And there is a sequel obviously coming out, a long delayed, awaited sequel coming out in December, the first of 4 planned sequels to Avatar. So we rewatched it for the first time for me, it would have been since the original Blu-ray came out in 2010. So, 12 years for me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, for me, I had only seen the movie the one time I saw it in the theaters. So it is since some Saturday afternoon in 2009 would have been the last time I watched this movie.
Interesting. So that'll be our main topic today. I'm curious, quick, Sean, thumbs up, thumbs down on Avatar.
That's
okay.
It's a firmly thumbs in the middle. You know, I don't think my feelings on the movie honestly have changed at all since 2009. I think that's basically my reaction. I think it has some very impressive sequences. I think everything to do with the narrative of the movie is very poorly handled in kind of every dimension, and that is how I feel about it.
I generally agree. I think the line I kind of came to on Twitter is that I think it is a bad script, brilliantly directed, and I think it kind of depends on where you put the weight, because I think that's probably generally how people would view this movie. Is it's very, you cannot deny that the effects work and all that is inspired, right?
Yeah.
And still heads and shoulders above most of what comes out today. And I think it just depends on where you put the weight in that statement. Does the bad script bother you more than the really inspired sort of aesthetics and direction invigorates you? And on this viewing, I think I was more invigorated by the latter. I would generally be in the meh camp too. But the funniest thing here, Sean, is I did run a Twitter poll asking people, what are your thoughts on Avatar? I gave 4 options. I said, loved it then, loved it now, loved it, but I forgot about it, meh then, meh now, and then hate it, death to Pandora. By far, the winner was meh then, meh now at 51%. Loved it, then forgot about it, was at 32%. Those are the honest people, generally, I would say, because this movie, Sean, I remember, because I can vouch for you, because we were friends, that you were always meh on this movie.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have, backfilled and gone, oh, I was always meh on this movie. I'm no, I was there. People kind of went gaga for this movie at the time. But anyway, and then only 14% said they always have loved it, and I think only one person voted that they hate it, and death to Pandora. I don't know why you'd say that. Pandora is the cool part of the movie. So anyway, there you go.
I don't I feel other than the blatant kind of racism of white guilt the movie, which is what the movie is, there's nothing remarkable enough about the storytelling to hate it for, right? And the racism part is such a sort of, I mean, it's something we'll definitely talk about it because it is kind of crazy. But it is also such a common problem that it's
on a
hard,
spectrum.
Yeah, it's hard for me to be incensed by the movie in some way. So I think it is not surprising to me that that's a very rare reaction of people actually hating the movie. Because I don't think there's anything that it goes for with its storytelling that's remarkable enough to inspire that kind of response.
Yeah, I think that's very true. So that will be our main topic. I think it's, this is not a movie we are super necessarily enthusiastic about, but I am actually really glad to be doing a little retrospective because it's kind of finally relevant again, and it is a genuinely weird pop culture phenomenon where I think people have forgotten how big it was because it just... And I think people overstate the it didn't leave a cultural impact thing. Part of that is because it never had sequels. It never had TV shows. It never had books. It had the theme park, which is down in, I think, Disney World, Florida. But it just hasn't had the extensions. I also don't think Iron Man 1 would have left a huge cultural impact if there weren't 50 Iron Man and Avengers movies, right? That's the kind of, thing to keep in mind. But we will talk about all of that. I'm curious about it. We have some other stuff on the agenda, including a trip down to Sean's Beta Corner to talk about the new Call of Duty. Lots of stuff. Sean, what have you been up to?
A big thing I've been doing this week. I mean, so we'll take a trip to my beta corner in a sec. But the other thing I've been doing, I just want to mention, just because I spent a lot of money on this very nice PC, and the most I've managed to sort of come up to do with it right now is just to replay Half-Life, because Half-Life is so good. But it is very funny to me that I'm very close to being done. I haven't replayed Half-Life in years, partially because I haven't had like a nice setup to do it. Obviously, my laptop could easily run that game. I'm talking about like the original 1998 Half-Life. But yeah, it's one of my favorite games. I love it to death. I haven't replayed it in a long time. I'm almost done. So I've spent about 10 hours this week playing through Half-Life 1. And it is very funny to me that I'm like, yes, I spent like $1,000 getting all this set up. And the main thing I have done with it is played through the original Half-Life. But if you have not played through the original Half-Life, you haven't done it in a while, that game's still great. That game really holds up. And you can play it on a very nice PC. Or you can play it on a complete garbage PC and it will still run, because it is a game that is 24 years old at this point.
I mean, Sean, I completely relate to you, because do you know what game I always launch on because this runs on Mac or PC, any computer in front of me, the game I will most often play is Doom.
Yep.
I will launch Doom. I have GZ Doom, which is the really, really good modern PC version. But it'll run on anything because it's Doom. And just load in any WAD file I want. Do I want to play some Chex Quest today? Do I want to play some Doom 2? Do I want to play some the Pirates Doom? There's all sorts of things. You just throw the WAD files in there. You go. I've been testing out. I've got a slightly new setup here, so I've got sort of two gaming mice I'm kind of choosing between here. And I pull them out and I test them on Doom, which is like objectively stupid because Doom does not take precise aiming, but I just know what feels good in my hand playing Doom. That's why. I mean, it's not to like test the aiming.
Doom is a game that predates the maps. So, like, you have to go in, like, one of the reasons why you have to do GZ Doom is because it doesn't have mouse look. Originally, you would just play that game with the keyboard and use the keyboard keys to swivel your view left and right, because it also originally did not have up-down aiming. So it is a hilarious game to be like, I'm going to test out my gaming mouse. Let me play the original Doom.
Yeah, not to test out, like, how accurate am I? Just to test, does it feel good? Mm-hmm. But I love it, and so I understand it. I'm almost done with another campaign of the original Doom in GZ Doom. It's the best. It's so good. So I understand your love of Half-Life. Somehow I've never played Half-Life. I need to play Half-Life.
Yeah, it's great. And, those old school PC shooters. It's something. There's something very comfortable about it. It is. While it is not stress testing my rig, it does just feel comfy, and it's nice to just like have like a nice big monitor and stuff like that to play that game on, which is how I played it originally, way back in the day. Is obviously on a desktop computer, and so there's something about it to me that's just like, I have a desktop, I must replay Half-Life. I'm sure I'll move on to Half-Life 2 and stuff. I'm not sure if I'll talk about it much on the podcast, but that is a big part of what I've been doing with my free time.
Nice. Yeah. My free time has mostly been, this weekend, it's been splitting between the Splatoon 3 Splatfest and the Call of Duty beta. So I've been playing all of that. I did not get much more time in God of War this week. I think I might not just need to lower the difficulty. I'm honestly finding it kind of annoying at the beginning, the combat stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I got busy with some other things, so I had not been playing a ton of it. I don't have a ton extra to talk about. This was a busy week, so that's what I've been doing. And then also just, GZ Doom is a great thing I launch when I am procrastinating on something, and I'm like, I will play a Doom map. That'll be a good 20 minutes, or, well, that's not one Doom map, but usually it turns into a couple. But you know what I mean.
Absolutely, yes. There's nothing better to kill your productivity than playing Doom. That is the thing that I understand very well.
It has been killing productivity for almost 30 years on the personal computer.
Exactly. They should have put that on the back of the box when they sold in the stores.
Yes, exactly. Do you want to go over to Sean's beta corner, Sean?
Yes, Jonathan. I think it's been a long time. I had to get out. It was still in one of my boxes from the move that I had to get. I had to dust it out. It's been well over a year since the last time, but it is time to take a trip down to Sean's beta corner.
Sean's beta corner.
Hello and welcome to Sean's Beta Corner. I'm Sean and this is my Beta Corner. We take a look at the latest and greatest in the hot world of video game betas. This week on the show, we've got an action-packed episode for everyone because we're not just taking a look at one beta, we are actually taking a look at two betas because we are looking at the spiritual successor to the Neo action RPG franchise from Team Ninja, because there was a beta for the game Wo Long Fallen Dynasty, and then there was also a beta for the latest in the ever-popular Call of Duty franchise, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Again, it's the 2-2. We're back again. Here we go again. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. So Wo Long Fallen Dynasty, this is the thing we mentioned briefly last week on the podcast, was that they had released that beta, but I had not had time to play it. I have played it. It's very good. So it's one level. For people who don't know, Wo Long Fallen Dynasty is basically is Neo with like some pretty substantial modifications to the combat set in the Three Kingdoms period of China. So it's very Neo-ish in the sense that it is dark fantasy. It's got clearly the same kind of character design, the same kind of monster design, but like translated to more Chinese folklore stuff than the Japanese folklore stuff of Neo and Neo 2. It has the exact same character creator, which is good because the character creator for Neo is great. And you do a create character like Neo 2. You pick a class, you have a bunch of different weapon types that are all Chinese now. So you've got like the big kind of crescent moon blade polearm thing that you would know that's like Guan Yu's weapon from Mermaid's Three Kingdoms. You've got the Chinese Dao, which is that kind of like straight sword. You've got a double-handed version of that. There's like a big curved sword. So a bunch of different weapon types. I assume there are probably more weapon types in the final game as well. The big difference between this and Neo is that the combat is not centered around stances, and it doesn't really have combos in the same way that Neo did. It's much more about, it's almost actually kind of God of War-ish in a very broad way, in the sense that it's more about you having like these different kinds of abilities that are on cooldowns that you set off. So you have these like magic skills, and you have these, I think they call them martial skills that are attached to the weapon you use. And then the magic skills are, you have like 4 spells that you basically pick when you're at the like proverbial bonfire of the game. It is still a Souls-esque game in the way that Neo was. So you have bonfires, they respawn enemies when you rest there, it recharges your health flasks, all that kind of stuff happens still. You level up, if you die, you lose. I think when you die, you only lose half of your like souls or experience or whatever they're called. You don't lose all of them, but it's all that kind of stuff is in the game. But the combat is focused more around you have these abilities and kind of stringing these different abilities together, rather than it about like a big skill tree where you have 3 different stances and 2 weapons, so 6 like sort of types of attacks to do between your 2 different melee weapons and like different strings and light and heavy and all that kind of stuff. The combat is like relatively simple compared to Neo. It's not simple combat. It's much more complicated than most games you would play, but it is more streamlined than Neo. It's a bit more action and kind of mobility focused. There aren't parries, there are like perfect dodges, so it's much more kind of, you're jumping around the map, you're doing a lot more dodges. It's less block focused like Neo was, but it has all the kind of like big giant monsters that you're trying to whittle down and avoid their attacks and all that kind of stuff that you'd expect from one of these games. It is a hard game to get your head around in like just playing a beta. If you have not played the Neo games, I think it would be a very hard beta to play, because it's very systems heavy and very complicated in its systems. And even if you have played Neo, a lot of the specifics of the systems are fairly different. So if you are like new to the kind of Team Ninja modern action RPG thing, I think it will be kind of a little bit off-putting because it doesn't tutorialize you particularly well, because it is just a beta. It gives you a brief tutorial and then throws you into this big level. But once I got my head around some of the changes, the way that the stamina system works differently, and it's kind of like there's like a real push and pull sort of mechanic of there's your stamina and the enemy stamina is almost kind of shared by a bar. And so it's like you're trying to get that bar to push more to the right and they're trying to get it to push to the left. It's sort of hard to explain, but it's an interesting mechanic. But yeah, it is a fun game. Like, it's a very cool beta. If you are into Neo, I would definitely check it out and see the ways in which there's kind of evolving and pushing it in different directions. It is not as different as Sekiro to like in Dark Souls, which is what I kind of thought going in. It was going to be a little bit more of, oh, they're going full more streamlined action the way that Sekiro does. It is not that extreme, but it is gesturing in that direction, and it is pulling some of that kind of stuff of being more mobility focused, more streamlined in terms of the combat, but it is not as far as Sekiro went in that direction. So, Well, on Fallen Dynasty, I'm very excited for that game to come out. I like all the Three Kingdoms stuff. You only get a little bit of a hint of it. The level is very early in the timeline. It's the Yellow Turban Rebellion, which, if you know River's Three Kingdoms, you know happens like right at the beginning. That's the thing that causes the Three Kingdoms to kind of have to split apart from the Han Dynasty. But really cool game, and I am looking forward to checking out the finished release, which comes out early next year.
Awesome. Do you think the full game will have that same issue of, like, if you haven't played Nioh, it might be inaccessible, or do you think it'll be better at onboarding?
It will probably still be harder. It'll still be a very systems heavy game, so you'll have to give it some of the some elbow grease to get in there. But I do think, like Nioh and Nioh 2 both had the same thing with the beta, of where it puts you into probably like the third or fourth mission in the game. And that's really hard to just get dropped in there. And then when the real game came, or the full game came out, there is one or two much simpler missions that onboard you a little bit easier and give you the big thing is they give you just space to try things out without it being really harsh and you getting killed over and over again because the enemies are easier. And that was one of the big things with Nioh and Nioh 2 is the first level is pretty easy. And so you get to learn the mechanics and just sort of play with them without it feeling like you're getting hit over and over and over again and just having to keep on respawning. Whereas this is, when you start at the third or fourth level, it is much harder to just sort of experiment and figure out what does and doesn't work. So I imagine that this feels exactly the way that the betas for Nioh and Nioh 2 felt. Which were very real betas. Those games changed in the specifics quite significantly between their different betas and showings. The original Nioh alpha, because it did two, it had an alpha and a beta. The original alpha for Nioh had weapon durability and shit, which was a terrible idea for that game, and that entire system was ripped out by the time the game actually was released. And I don't know if there's anything in here that is that severe, but I'm going to guess that this is a real beta and it will have shifted in some of the stuff that probably players are confused by. I imagine they will go in and they will tutorialize more or alter the first level and stuff like that to make it easier to get in, would be my guess.
Right. That makes sense. And this one I might pick up because I did not get into the Nioh games, but this one sounds cool and we'll see when it fully comes out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other beta, of course, this week, and one that I know that you can also speak to, Jonathan, is the beta for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. This is a multiplayer-only beta, as is standard for Call of Duty stuff. I imagine that this is probably more of because this game comes out in a month. This is probably less of a beta, and more of I imagine they're getting network beta type stuff. They're testing their network stuff. They'll probably take whatever feedback they have from this and use it for a day one patch or something to adjust balance. But I do not expect there to be substantial changes between what this beta is and the actual release of the game. But this is the next Infinity Ward Call of Duty game since the 2019's Modern Warfare, which was a game that we both really loved, and it's also a game that we can no longer play because that game got fucked to high heaven with all the weird modular shit they did, and when Warzone happened, it just created an absolute clusterfuck. Which hopefully is better this time around, that they now they're not going to have to just sort of after the fact surgically attach an entire battle royale mode into this game. So hopefully some of that stuff gets fixed for when the full game releases. But this beta is pretty straightforward. It's a few game modes like Team Deathmatch, Domination. I've only really played Team Deathmatch. There's a third person mode that I kept on meaning to play, but I never actually checked out. It sounds cool. But it is very much a sequel to the first Modern Warfare, or the first Modern Warfare, 2019's Modern Warfare. It's like talking about the Xbox One and the OG Xbox is where we're at with the Modern Warfare Call of Duty games. This is not OG Modern Warfare, but that was Modern Warfare 1 that came out in 2019 now, retroactively, and I have had a blast with this beta. I have not played actively a Call of Duty since 2019's Modern Warfare. I played the beta for Black Ops Cold War and bounced off of it very hard because I don't personally love the Treyarch super twitchy style Call of Duty, and this is much more like 2019's Modern Warfare, where if you slow down, you play more tactically, you really pick your shots. This is the kind of game where if you switch your M4 carbine to semi-automatic fire. If you're shooting at longer range, that is a smart thing to do, and you will perform better. And that's the kind of shooter it is. It is not a sim, but it is much more tactical than Call of Duty traditionally has been in the line of Modern Warfare 2019. And it has been very fun getting back into that mindset. And I've had a very good time playing the beta so far.
Couldn't agree more. I think it's ludicrously good. Before we talk about it specifically, I do just want to say I think we need to settle on an official title for this game for the Weekly Stuff podcast. And I think this game will be known on the Weekly Stuff podcast as Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Here We Go Again.
Yes.
That is the name of this game. It is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Here We Go Again. It'll take a long time to say every time, but I think it is worth it. And Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Here We Go Again is fantastic. The beta, I could not be enjoying it more. It's wonderful. The matchmaking is as good as I've ever seen. Just snappy as hell. Matches are great. No online issues to speak of whatsoever. And then, I've been mostly playing the quick play, which is deathmatch and domination. But I have also gone into the invasion mode, which is the big 20 on 20. I think that's very fun as well. What's been exciting for me is this is the first time I've had the setup right to play Call of Duty keyboard and mouse. And that is transformative for me. I am loving it so much. You guys know I vastly prefer that for first-person shooters. And this is one of the games that on Xbox allows you to do that. So I actually have revamped my desk setup where I have my Mac. I have a second monitor, which sometimes helps with work. And, if I am taking notes on something, it's easier to throw it up on this monitor than trying to take notes with the laptop in my couch or in my lap on the couch out there on my big TV or something. But then I also use this for gaming, and it's a nice gaming monitor. And I have that hooked up to my Xbox Series S, which actually is the best way to use the Series S. The Series S is a great gaming monitor console because it is not 4K, but it does all the other stuff. Like it can do variable frame rate and stuff like that, which is really good because Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Here We Go Again, like most Call of Duties, it's a locked solid 60 FPS on console if that's how you're playing it. But they have on Series S, and I'm sure this is true on all the other new hardware, unlocked it if you're above that. So it can go up to 120, which is what my monitor can do. It's very up and down through there. If you were playing it on a non-VRR display, it would be tearing like shit. But if you have FreeSync, which the Xbox supports, which is awesome, then there is no tearing, and it feels very good. It is kind of funny if you have I had my frame count on, and it was hilarious because it was going it really does go from 60 to 120, just depending on what you're looking at, which would be terrible if you didn't have VRR.
Yeah.
But anyways, if you do have that, it's great. I've super been enjoying that. I have I got a little mechanical keyboard for the first time. I got a cheap one. Never used that before. That is actually very fun. I do not like that kind of keyboard for typing personally, like writing, but for gaming, I do see now why people love those. It's very fun. I have a little 60% one. And yeah, been using that. And honestly, part of why I was putting this setup together was in anticipation of Call of Duty, and because I loved Modern Warfare 1, or Modern Warfare the Squeakquel, whatever we want to call the 2019 Modern Warfare that was not the original Modern Warfare. But, eventually that path was closed off to us because of their crazy launcher situation, and I have been missing it, and playing this again, I have not wanted to stop while I have been playing it. It is just so good. It is so snappy. And as you say, all the little it's not a sim, but all the different strategic elements you can put into play. It's amazing how the game, Call of Duty never feels 100% balanced, and that's the fun of it. It's not quite an esport kind of game, right? Like it is, you will have, you are running across the map and then you just get blown up by a fucking drone or something, right? Like that's not a balanced element. That's the equivalent of the fucking blue shell in Mario, but it is fun in Call of Duty to have those things and to have all the different weapons you can bring in and the personalization, and it still feels competitive, like you always have a chance, you know? And yeah, it's as good as it's ever been. I think there is a flavor of Call of Duty for everyone at this point, including all you World War II weirdos. I'm kidding. I would like a World War II Call of Duty too. I've just heard that they're not good.
I would like a World War II Call of Duty that's in this style. Like I just don't. I can't play the super twitchy Treyarch style Call of Duties anymore. It's just and I never preferred that style, but I used to be decent at them, and I just can't do it. Like we are aging out of the super twitch shooter thing, and that's the nice thing about these. This new version of Modern Warfare is that you can play that way, and lots of people do, and they bunny hop around corners and do all their dumb, annoying Call of Duty shit, and I wish that, the game that penalized some of that stuff more. I get why they wouldn't, Like I think everyone wants their preferred playstyle to be the only playstyle preferred supported because that's what they prefer, but it probably makes the game richer that people can do their dumb bullshit. But the difference is that you don't have to do the dumb bullshit to be successful at this game. You can play slower, you can play more tactically, and the game very actively supports that play style. And it was that moment of me playing this and realizing like, oh right, I should actually switch the fire mode of my rifle to semi-automatic if I'm trying to hit someone at range, the way that one would do in real life, but also just like in a video game sense, it's very satisfying. There's a mechanical operation to the firearms in the Modern Warfare games that is very satisfying just from a like tactical kind of point of view and from a tactile point of view. There's a finickiness to the weaponry and the detail of that kind of stuff that's very fun. And it's very true of the 2019 game. It's very true of this one. They have all their like crazy nutso gun customization stuff that they've taken like even further this time. I think some of the menus around that take a little bit to wrap your head around, that they could be a little bit clearer. But once you figure it out, as with any UI, like, once you figure it out, and it doesn't become a problem anymore. It's just like, there's a lot of very layered menus. But I like their overall approach this time around, which is that the guns are like part of kind of like the real world history of a lot of these firearms, where they come from like, the AR-15 or whatever, and from that branches out the M16 and the M4 and like these light machine gun versions and stuff like that. And so what they have is that you unlock the different receivers of these different sort of classes of the weapons that are variants of this, again, like this AR-15 style weapon platform. And from that is how you unlock the different versions of guns. So this is where you get this light machine gun version. This is where you get like the Hurricane or whatever, which is the submachine gun variant of like the M4 and all of that. And so you really are able to just fully customize the weapon in every single dimension, and the optics and the muzzle fucking flash suppressors and foregrips and stocks and laser sights and who has it and what have yous, ammunition types, different kinds of magazines and all of that. And it has that like level of customization the last game had, but even more. But then on top of it, the way that system works is that when you unlock this version of a red dot sight, you just have unlocked that red dot sight, and it will be on. You can put it on any of the guns. You have to like level up the gun to like a basic level to unlock the ability to put attachments on it. But once you can put attachments on that gun, you can put any of the attachments you've unlocked that can fit to that gun type. Obviously, if you unlocked like 7.62 armor piercing ammunition, it's not going to go on a gun that uses like 5.56 or whatever the fuck it is. So some of those are locked out. But that I prefer to, I have to re-unlock the exact same red dot sight on every single gun over and over and over again. I like the idea that you are unlocking these pieces and then you're moving into different versions of guns. And are able to bring forward some of those attachments you already unlocked and start unlocking new attachments that maybe you can bring back into a weapon that you used previously. It's a much more like engaging version of the weapon customization. And I feel like, and this is partially probably because it's the beta, so everything, you're at low levels, so you're constantly unlocking new stuff. But I do feel like I'm messing with the customization more than I did in 2019, where I more kind of picked the couple guns that I liked and then just stuck with it, and didn't really kind of venture outside that, partially because I didn't want to just have to keep unlocking the very, very basic versions of attachments. And so not having to do that, and instead being able to say, okay, well, I know I like this red dot sight, I'll just use this red dot sight. But now that opens up my brain to start thinking about, what if I took this battle rifle, and eventually I took one of the battle rifles in the game, which is your like longer range, meant to be fired semi-automatic style rifle, and I customized it so heavily with like, I put like a little tiny barrel on it. I had like a 50 round drum magazine I put on it, a vertical foregrip, like this shitty stock. And I totally customized it to the point where it became less of a battle rifle and more like a sci-fi looking Tommy gun, basically, because it had this huge fucking drum magazine and this dumb foregrip. And I was like, I'm some weird modern warfare mobster or something running around with this dumb gun that was supposed to be this big crazy rifle with the scope and all this stuff, and now it is this like weapon that I'm firing mostly from the hip. But it was super effective to play that way, and at certain times I could switch it to that semi-automatic mode, and I had like killed a lot of its accuracy, but not so much of its accuracy that I couldn't in certain scenarios use it a little bit like its original intended design. And that's been very fun. And I think that what they've done with the gun customization allows you to play more with moving the weapons on that kind of spectrum between submachine gun, assault rifle, LMG, and all that kind of stuff, and really kind of find a niche for each of the weapons. And that's been a thing I've been playing around a lot with.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have not gotten super deep into the customization yet, but I'm excited to. It's something that, like, I think because it's the beta, I just haven't gone that deep into it, and I was preferring just to kind of get a feel for the pointing and shooting and all of that stuff. But what I've seen of it looks great. It's got, I think, as you say, the layout is a little more complicated, but it's still got, when you like go into the gunsmith, it like blows the gun out and it shows you all the different parts, and all of that's very intuitive, I think. I like how it like gives you a very clear like red, green, pro, cons list of everything you put on the gun. It's incredibly deep. And like the multiplayer, this is the rare game that I will gladly pay $70 just for the multiplayer suite. I might play the campaign. We'll see. But, like, that's not what I'm buying it for. And that is, there's certainly enough here. I also just want to say, the maps are fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't often say that about Call of Duty. I think the ones in this game are phenomenal. And not just in the generally Call of Duty maps are good on the level of, like, overall level design to make it competitive and make it fun and all of that. There's also just like a visual flair to them this year. Like the one that is at the museum in Spain or wherever that is like on a mountainside. That's one of the coolest Call of Duty levels ever. I love that one. But there's a ton that I've just been like, oh, these are cool environments in addition to being really fun maps to learn and find all the kind of ways in and out and around. And so that has impressed me as well.
Yeah, there's only like 3 or 4 maps, obviously, because it's a beta. But yeah, I like all of them. There's a good variety there. And it's very much, I think it'll be a contentious thing, because I know it was with the 2019 game, of where if you're into the Treyarch style Call of Duties, those games have very, very samey, what they call 3-lane map design, because the maps are designed around 3 lanes that intersect in different fashions. And this is not like that. These are like the old style Modern Warfare maps, where they are like bigger. They have like lots of the kind of interchanging sight lines. There's not like a clear, here's this lane, the middle lane, here's the right lane, here's the left lane. It doesn't have that kind of design at all. So you really have to learn the maps to play them. I know that some people who like the Treyarch version don't love that kind of map design. For me, that is one of the reasons why I don't like the Treyarch games, is because I think the maps are super boring. Whereas here, they all have a personality to them. And some of that might mean that they are maps that you don't like, but they still have a personality, and that's like the thing I want. Like I like having that kind of like personal relationship to the map, which is very much what Modern Warfare 1 and 2 back in the day had, and that's like very much Halo. And this is actually like one of the issues I had with Halo Infinite's map design also, is that it's like the edges are all sanded down, and there's not like a conceptual quality to how it's designed. And here it feels like, okay, yeah, like this is kind of like the maps are a little bit thorny, and you have to really get your head around them. And the first time you play it, you might feel like you're just getting picked off from every corner because you haven't learned it yet. But as you play them more and more, you develop a relationship and a knowledge of the map, and I feel like as I play the maps over and over again, I keep on relearning them and getting better at them, which is the exact same way that I did with Modern Warfare 2019. And that's incredibly fun. So if you're into that kind of map design, this is very much in that tradition. And I'm like you, I'm having a really good time with that.
Yeah, I think it's one of the ways that these games, specifically the Modern Warfare 1 and 2, the new ones, feel like they're kind of from an alternate like timeline that like where we kept making multiplayer games like that instead of, I think we very much went down the Black Ops detour, and that became the default for a lot of games like this, and that's fine. I'm totally happy that Black Ops exists every couple of years for the people who like that. I don't, but whatever, that's fine. I don't have to play them. And it's one of the actually nice things about Call of Duty is that it's an annualized franchise, but if you like a specific flavor, you don't have to play every year. And like, that's fine. I'm totally fine with that. And this one definitely feels like it is from that kind of alternate path where we kept developing that kind of like map ethos and everything. And so it's this super advanced, fleshed out version. And yeah, it is night and day with Halo Infinite. I mean, this beta is more fully featured than fucking Halo Infinite is right now. I think it's also a bigger download, which might be a problem. We'll talk about that. But yeah, it's it's very fun. It very much, if you like those kind of old school FPS games where like the maps have character to them, and so do I think a lot of just the weapons and loadouts and all of that stuff. This is absolutely that kind of game. It's very much made for like people like you and me, Sean, and that's great. And if it's not your thing, I'm sure Black Ops 6 is right around the corner.
Yes, yeah. Treyarch will continue to make their game, but it is nice that like Call of Duty is differentiated enough at this point, because it was not like this for a long time. For a long time, it felt like every Call of Duty was some variant of the Treyarch design, and that meant that the Treyarch ones were the ones that people only cared about because they obviously do the Treyarch thing the best because they're fucking Treyarch. Whereas now it's like, okay, Infinity Ward has their own version of Call of Duty. And that is very much to my taste. It's to your taste. I think if you're like an old fucker who kind of fell off of Call of Duty, this is the Call of Duty for you, is what it feels like. You can be an old person and still play this game. But if you don't like this, then you'll have another Call of Duty next year that will be probably more to your taste, or you can continue to play Vanguard or Black Ops Cold War, whichever the one is the one that people are playing if they don't want to play this one.
And I think they're like doing a Warzone 2 with this game, right? Is that at launch or is that later?
I think that's later.
Okay.
But it is a thing that they are designing with intent, which is, for me, what's important. That's, they could still totally fuck it up. I'm not saying that it's a guarantee that they're going to resolve the complexity of that scenario, but at least there is hope that when Warzone 2 comes out, it does not completely destroy the existing multiplayer game the way that happened with the original Modern Warfare. Or Modern Warfare 2019, or I hate the title of these games.
I know.
Modern Warfare.
Modern Warfare.
Yes.
The one thing I am terrified about is this beta with just a couple of maps is like 40 gigabytes, and will the full game fit on my Xbox Series S? Is the question. Not will it fit with some other games. I just hope the whole thing fucking fits, and I can still have like Halo installed. That would be great.
Yeah, I'm playing it on the PS5, and I think it actually is a little bit of a smaller, as is like the case with some PS5 games. It's actually a little bit smaller, but it is not small. It is like 32 or something gigabytes, I think. So yes, it is. It does not seem like they are going to fix the crazy memory footprint of Call of Duty entirely. Hopefully, it's better. But yes, I had the same reaction when I loaded up the multiplayer beta, saw the number of maps and the amount of content. Maybe there's a bunch of bunk data that's in that beta that is causing it to inflate its total size or something. I don't know. But I'm going to guess that game is going to be some stupid 80 gigabyte download or something when it actually comes out. That's going to quickly become like a 150 gigabyte download within a year with all the free maps and whatever they put in the game.
Yeah, because I'm at a point where my Series S it's a hilariously small number of games I actually have on the internal memory. I have a little hard drive that I've used with my Xbox for years. It's sitting here and it's got most of the games on it, and then it's also got a lot of the Series S games that I just have to kind of like trade back and forth if I want to play them. But it's very funny. One thing I might do before the new game is, just because I am having on a Call of Duty kick and I want to play this, I might go back and actually play the Modern Warfare 1, not Modern Warfare 1, the Modern Warfare 2019 campaign out of curiosity, because I've always been curious. Well, you talked a lot about it and being conflicted because it's like a good game but it has terrible politics. Yes. I'm very curious about it, and like I will probably play the campaign on the new one as well because I'll have paid for it and I want to see what it's about. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the campaign from a gameplay perspective, because I bet it will be good from a gameplay perspective. I do not expect them to fix any of the storytelling and like politics side of it. It is not a thing that's going to get better in Call of Duty. Like it is, you have to completely turn your brain off. But like that being said, that's no more than you do if you watch a Marvel movie. If you watch one of the Captain America movies, you have to turn your brain off to the rawness of it as much as you would with a Call of Duty. So it's like, I don't want to overstate it in some ways, because it is just what it is to live in the world. We're going to talk about Avatar in a second. It is what it's just what it is. There's lots of, like, most popular media is very propagandistic. Call of Duty is very, very propagandistic. And that is not going to change in the sequel.
What do you think about the reports that a future Call of Duty will be an Iraq War Call of Duty?
I mean, they've been Iraq War Call of Duties the whole fucking time. They've been Iraq War Call of Duty since Modern Warfare. They just didn't call it that, So it's like, will it have been long enough where they'll just like literally say it. Like I think that will make it worse, but also it's like that's what it has been. That is what Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was. It's just they filed the names off the tin and threw a Russian in there. Like that's all.
Like that's the thing is, I'm just super curious if it's set in Iraq. What will the twist be to find out the Russians were the actual villains of the Iraq War? Like that's what it'll be, right? It'll be like there were weapons of mass destruction, and it was the Russians all along.
That's what the plot of Call of Duty 4 is. Like that's already that's what it already was. They just filed the serial numbers off.
It just there's something about like filing the serial numbers back on that feels like the snake eating its own tail. You know what I mean? Yes. It's like this is too full circle. This is like too real in some sense. The ridiculous, it's all Middle Eastern conflicts, but we're never fighting Middle Easterners, we're fighting Russians, is the weirdest and most wonderful thing about Call of Duty somehow at the same time.
Yeah, yes. I would not be shocked if eventually you have the third reboot of Call of Duty Modern Warfare called Call of Duty The Modern Warfare that is now a period piece set during the Iraq War, but they have the nuke go off like in Call of Duty 4, but it's an actual nuke that went off in Iraq in this made-up version of history. That was the actual weapon of mass destruction that did not exist in the country. That is like a terrifyingly possible future scenario that we'll be in with this franchise, I think.
Yes, it is. All right. Sean, do you want to go ahead and exit the beta corner for now?
Yes, we'll step out of the beta corner, respectfully close the door. Hopefully we can get back in there the near future again. It was a thing that I hadn't realized how long it had been until I thought, oh wait, I can talk about some betas on the podcast. It's like, oh right, we had a running joke about that. I can finally bring it back.
There you go. Ba-da-da-da-da-da corner.
All right, what do we have coming up next, Jonathan?
Avatar.
Last Airbender. Oh, we already made that joke.
Yeah, we already made that joke. All right. Avatar 2009, the James Cameron movie. James Cameron's Avatar, the movie that broke 1 million search engine optimizations.
Yes.
The thing being, I would be absolutely shocked if James Cameron, when he made this movie, knew about the existence of Avatar The Last Airbender. I mean, he had this movie in preparation like a decade before that show was made, so, you know, it's just very funny.
Yeah, because he's got kids, right? So the question is, how old are his children? Were his children old enough to be watching Avatar The Last Airbender? That's the only way he would possibly know about the existence of that series.
That's true. And the thing is, I feel like when The Last Airbender was on TV was not the height of its popularity. Like, somehow that show has, like, snowballed over time.
Yeah, it became, like, an internet fandom thing. Yeah, like a cult hit, for sure.
That show only ended in July 2008, so only about a year and a half before Avatar, the movie, came out. The funniest part of all that is that when M. Night Shyamalan made his movie of The Last Airbender, he couldn't use the title Avatar, and it was just called The Last Airbender, which is an easy way to distinguish the actual Avatar from The Last Airbender from the James Cameron's Avatar.
Yes, it's the awful world we live in is everything has the same title now, and it is, having done a podcast for so long talking about media, it is impossible to talk about anything because everything has the same title, like Avatar.
I appreciate that the new Avatar movie, Avatar The Way of Water, has a distinct title and is not called The Avatar or something.
Yes.
Because that could have happened. I do think it would be a hilarious fucking flex if at some point one of these sequels that he's making is called Avatar The Last Airbender.
Yes, or he just needs to make, like, Avatar The Myth of Korra. It's not The Legend of Korra, it's The Myth of Korra.
And Korra is spelled differently.
Yes, it's with a Q.
Yeah, QOR''RA.
Yes.
All right. Sean, what do we have to say about James Cameron's Avatar? Do you want to start with just a little bit of the background on this movie?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I did go ahead and watch through some of the bonus features on the Blu-ray set of this movie, which are fascinating. Honestly, they might be more entertaining than the film itself because the production of this movie is quite the amazing technical feat in a lot of different ways, and I think has actually a lot of lessons for how modern filmmaking has gone astray in the years since. But Cameron had been, like, playing with this for a lot of his life. Part of the, like, inspiration for the entire look of Pandora is just where he grew up, being around forests and jungles and stuff like that, and being into that kind of exploration. Obviously, he's done all the deep sea diving stuff, which plays into this a little bit. And this movie was something he had planned, he had a treatment for around the time they were working on Titanic. They shelved it because they felt the technology wasn't there yet. Came back to it after he did all the deep sea diving movies in about 2005, and then had several years, I think 2 full years of active pre-production before Fox greenlit the film. Fox gave them a little bit of money to just do pre-production, and they did all sorts of stuff, inventing technology. There's a dynamic new mocap system, a new stage that they called the Volume, which is different from the Volume now, which is the
LED
what do you
screen
call
thing.
it? That's it's like the LED screen thing that like the Mandalorian uses. And they had all sorts of stuff was invented for this movie. Lots and lots of pre-production in terms of all the concept art and all that, and then finally had the movie greenlit and started making it. And I think it's an interesting project because people had been hearing about it in the background for a while. Because of that protracted development, it was an expensive movie. It was never the most expensive movie, which is what people often like said at the time. I think just assuming it must have been, and it wasn't. There were like, because James Cameron knows how to manage a budget, and there were movies like Pirates of the Caribbean 4 that somehow spent you can look this up, that is still the most expensive movie ever made at like $400 million, and no one knows how or why. I know how or why. They hired Rob Marshall, who is one of the worst directors ever, and doesn't know how to manage a budget, and that's why that movie is that expensive. But anyway, so yeah, and what's so interesting about Avatar in my memory is that before the movie actually came out, they were very good in the marketing about maintaining an aura of mystique, and it was very much marketed not on the story, but on the world and on the effects and on this one kind of word, Avatar. What's it even about? We didn't really even know. And it wasn't until pretty close to release that there were actual like trailers that sort of gave you the plot. But you would not... I think now Avatar has this deserved reputation for being a very, very, very conventional Hollywood story, but you would not have known that going in, and that's part of... Like, I actually think... I'm sure the marketing budget for this movie was huge. It was not huge in the way, like, an Avengers marketing campaign is, because they intentionally kind of kept it vague to kind of keep the hype up, and so it had all this kind of, like, mystique around it. It debuted in December of 2009. It had an opening weekend in the United States of $77 million, which you would not expect then to go on and become the highest-grossing movie of all time. But its second weekend was also $77 million. And then its third weekend was in that boat, too. And it just, almost to a T to what happened to Titanic, which was the previous James Cameron film and the previous highest-grossing movie of all time, it just stuck the fuck around. And then also, and the difference between this and Titanic is the global film market was so much bigger, and this movie was big in literally every country it came out in. Mm-hmm. Some proportionally actually bigger than it was in the United States. Like China. This was a huge movie in China. When this movie was briefly beaten at the box office by Avengers Endgame for the final title, it was re-released in China during the pandemic because there were no new movies, and they put it back in theaters, and it made like $50 million and overtook Avengers again. So it is still the highest grossing movie in nominal real world dollars. And yeah, everybody saw it. Everybody saw it. Everybody talked about it. There were all sorts of weird merchandising. If you have never looked up the Avatar branded fleshlights, that's a fucking thing. You can go. They were not actually Avatar branded.
Yeah.
I should say. Obviously, Fox did not sign off on that, but Fleshlight decided we're going to do an alien fleshlight that is blue and looks like the Na'vi. Kind of fucked up, but those did exist. So Avatar, definite cultural phenomenon. And then it kind of faded away. Obviously, Hollywood was changing around that time. We were getting into our interconnected universe phase. And so Marvel becomes very, very big on the heels of Avatar. I think one of the bigger legacies of Avatar is that obviously all of the 3D stuff around it, part of the hype of the technology was this was the first hit 3D movie of, I would say, the third 3D resurgence. The first 3D surge is in the 50s, the second is in the 80s, and then the third is like 2009 to 2015 or so. It has always been a fad that fizzles out. We'll see if Avatar 2 starts a fourth 3D resurgence, but yes, this was the era where Avatar was so big in 3D that then 2010 had a bunch of movies that were not in any way shot for 3D, that had very shitty post-production conversions to 3D, and they were also shitty movies, but they made a bunch of money because people wanted 3D. And the two big ones were the Clash of the Titans remake with Sam Worthington.
Right.
And Alice in Wonderland, the Tim Burton movie, both of which terrible 3D, terrible movies. Alice in Wonderland made $1 billion. People forget that. That movie made $1 billion. Back when making $1 billion was rare. Avatar had been like the 4th movie to do it or something. Maybe the 5th. The Dark Knight had done it also at this point in 2008. So that's kind of the background. There's a lot of different angles to take it from. Do you remember seeing this for the first time when it came out, all of that stuff?
Yeah, because, I mean, I was never particularly super interested in it. Like, it was a thing where, I don't know, like, everything I saw of it and the buzz around it, just, I think I was just very kind of skeptical of it. And I think, for me, appropriately so, when I actually saw the movie. But I remember the hype. Like, I remember, I mean, for me to, like, really put it in the exact moment. Whenever I think about this movie, I think about the fucking Rooster Teeth podcast, because I listened to that podcast back then. And them talking about, like, seeing, because there was, like, you know, there's like a 15-minute preview that was shown in this, and it was like, it was that kind of, you know, a very effective and genius kind of marketing campaign of people being like, oh my god, it will blow your mind. Because yes, the whole hype around it was that it will, like, this is going to change what movies are. Like Avatar will happen, and then movies will be different after that moment, was like the way they were kind of selling it. But not in a, like, it will, you know, it'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, in a, the technology of what this movie is going to change the experience of films forever, was like the message that the marketing was trying to disseminate. And I think there's just something about it that I never really sort of got what that, what is it supposed to be? Is it just supposed to be 3D? Like, what is it like they're all cartoon people? Like, what is the thing that, like, is going to change the world of films forever? And then when I saw the movie, like, I remember feeling like, okay, the 3D looks cool. Like, the 3D was really effective for that. It's, I think, the only time I felt like a 3D movie in that era was actually, like, particularly well done. Like, there are others that did it okay, but Avatar, you know, it delivered on that front in terms of the spectacle of the 3D and the groundbreaking nature of a lot of what they did with their visual effects, which was to a scale for a nominally live action film that had not been done. Obviously, we had Jar Jar Binks and we'd had Gollum. Like, we had like 3D animated characters that were very believable and all of that, but nothing to this scale and the size of, like, Pandora, the elaborateness of the cinematic sequences and stuff like that, many of which are almost more comparable to video game cutscenes than they are to like Hollywood movies in terms of some of, like, the ways that they're shot and stuff like that, which is fascinating to watch now, is to look at that and be like, this feels like I'm watching like something stylistically more akin to a Metal Gear Solid cutscene or God of War cutscene than to watching a conventional Hollywood movie in terms of some of the camera movements made and stuff like that. But that was, like, the stuff that was impressive, and it was impressive at the time to me. But I think, you know, for me, the kind of the memes around Avatar as being kind of like shiny, you know, the kind of, like, looks nice on the outside but is very empty on the inside is very much true. I think, like, at the time I was did not care about the story, did not care about the characters. It's this sort of, like, weird thing of where it is technically very inventive and imaginative, and it technically has, you know, I would say, a very impressive feat of world building in a technical sense. But I also don't care about Pandora because I don't care about any of the people that live in that world. And that was kind of how I felt at the time. And rewatching the movie, I had the exact same experience of, like, I can see on a technical way why all this stuff is very impressive, but I cannot be brought to be emotionally invested in any of it. So it all comes to naught for me in an experiential sense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I probably am more positive on it than you, but I'm also the person in film school, and I'm the person, like, more deeply invested in, I think, some of the craft side of this, and it just, like, it fires certain synapses in my brain that I get very interested in. Honestly, rewatching this movie, I realized I enjoy Avatar in a very similar way to a way I enjoy a movie that was not a hit, but was a similar kind of, like, tech demo as a movie thing, which is the Ang Lee film Gemini Man from a couple of years ago. I genuinely like Ang Lee's Gemini Man. Not, I think it's a particularly good movie. I do think, like, it's a fucking fascinating tech demo of a movie. Like, I think it's very clear Ang Lee wanted to experiment with high frame rate photography. That movie was shot at 120 FPS. You can see it on 4K Blu-ray at 60. Which is obviously still plenty high to get the effect. And it was also done in 3D, which is not on the Blu-ray. And he also was doing this thing where you have Will Smith opposite young Will Smith, which is done with CG. And so it's all these kind of technical challenges. And that movie was based on a script that had been written like 15 years earlier, never gotten made, and Ang Lee basically dusted it off and went, this is stupid enough for me to do my movie with. Like, this is simple enough. I don't have to worry about the story. I can do all my tech experiments. And hey, Ang Lee is a brilliant technical director, and so that movie is technically brilliant and like really kind of interesting and like compelling on that level. It does some things with action photography and with special effects that you've just never seen. It is still probably the number one 4K demo disc. If I wanted to pull out and show someone why a 4K TV is worth it, that's the one that I think the average person would most immediately go, oh shit, I get it. That looks different than my 1080p TV or something. I think it made better use of those technologies than The Hobbit did, for instance, they did the 48 frames per second thing. And I think Avatar I enjoy in the same way, where the script and plot for this movie, such as it is so conventional. It is so threadbare. People like to say it's Dances with Wolves or something. Dances with Wolves is a story. Like, I need people to understand Dances with Wolves was not groundbreaking. Dances with Wolves was not like, oh my god, Kevin Costner invented a new genre of fiction and then James Cameron ripped it off. Dances with Wolves is a movie that had whiskers on it by the time it came out. Like, that's also like, the difference that Dances with Wolves had was it had a genuine, or a general sense of authenticity. Not total authenticity, obviously. It's still a white man's version of the Native American narrative, but it had like actual Native American actors and language consultants and sets and that kind of stuff that I think brought it a certain level of like, for the time, cultural cachet. But that was not a new story. And so by the time you get to 2009 and Avatar, it's really not a new story. And it is like, I think the dialogue in this movie is among the worst dialogue I've ever heard in a film. It's embarrassing. It's amateurish. I don't think that's necessarily James Cameron's greatest strength, but certainly you put this next to like Terminator or The Abyss or Aliens or something, and it's like, man, what happened here? Because he is usually a better writer of dialogue than this. Like, there are iconic lines you can point to in Aliens or something. There are iconic lines in Avatar because they're bad. It is. I think people like to make fun of the dialogue in the Star Wars prequels. This is so much worse. So much worse.
I mean, one thing I had totally forgotten on the dialogue front, because I will say, like, other than obviously I remember what the plot was, because it is, as you say, it's very conventional, and there were some specific moments, like the mech fight at the end, which is very good, that I remembered. But most of the specifics of this movie did not exist in my brain anymore. And I was flabbergasted when the, like, theatrical cut Blade Runner style fucking VO started happening. I'm
yes.
Like, what? This has like, and it's like, it is exactly of that quality. It feels like he almost intentionally was trying to make it sound, it sounds like Sam Worthington was directed to sound like Harrison Ford, like bored, maybe high in a room reading that like terrible Moore-esque dialogue for those fucking VO sessions. It's so bad, and also as like a frame device, as is typical with most of the narrative stuff they do in this movie, doesn't actually make much sense in the way it's deployed. And so yeah, it's like, I agree with you on the dialogue front, and that was the most egregious part of it, was those awful fucking narration segments.
Awful narration. So all of that is funny. It's weird, but as bad as all that stuff is, I do think like the technology side of it, this is a demo reel immersive for the future of cinema. It's still relatively unparalleled. Like, and I actually think that so this movie is 13 years old now, because we are all old as shit, and the like special effects have gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse with every year since this movie came out. There are some things in Avatar that look a little dated. There are so many more things that still feel ahead of their time, because it feels like a lost fucking art. Like, there are stuff they do with the thing that amazes me most is the lighting, like the dynamic, real, actual luminance and lighting on characters and environments, and how it all blends together. That is just something that is like, you cannot find in the special effects in Marvel movies. Like, if you want to understand why does She-Hulk look so bad, go look at the Na'vi in this movie and how the Na'vi, their skin texture and color, like, reflects the light of the scene they are in, and then go look at She-Hulk and like, oh, she's not lit. She's just not lit. She's just in the scene, evenly lit, and there's no response to the environment around her. That's part of why she doesn't feel like she's in the scene and why the effects are so bad. So there's tons of that kind of stuff. It is a ridiculously detailed, on an aesthetic level, sci-fi world that they have built. I would be 150% more interested in the nature documentary version of this if James Cameron had just said, I made a cool fake planet and we're going to do a flyby through it and give you and it'll be Zoe Saldana doing cool narration about the flora and fauna of Pandora. I would watch the shit out of that because it's cool. And there are scenes, I think the best extended sequence in the movie is early on when Jake gets lost. And this is when he then goes and he goes through the forest. He meets Neytiri. At first he has the torch, and then she gets him to put the torch out, and that's when you realize everything is bioluminescent. And it's just that journey they go on together that has very little dialogue and is just James Cameron doing visual kinetic storytelling. And I think it's great. I think that's a beautiful stretch of the movie. I think there are many big sequences that are just incredible aesthetic achievements. And I do think in general, like the ability James Cameron has for special effects filmmaking is truly second to none. It's up there with your George Lucas's and your Peter Jackson's, and probably better in some ways. He's very, very good at it. But that's really what the movie is. And I think it's funny when you look at the bonus features, it's genuinely hard to find a part where they're talking about the story. Mm-hmm. They are so often talking about it. And James Cameron himself is talking about, like, I wanted to do all these technical challenges. And I do think he had a very clear idea of the world. I think his artists had a very clear idea of the world. You see the artists in the bonus features just light up when they get to talk about, like, the bioluminescence and the science behind it and why this looks this way and why that looks that way. All of it deeply thought through. But you start to realize the very present absence in the room is any discussion of, like, the story they're telling, because I think that came last. I think that genuinely is, like, James Cameron had this, like, environment he wanted to do, and then it's like, what is a surefire, successful Hollywood formula that I can put onto this to get us to make our movie? And I think that's what Avatar is. And so it is a very mixed bag. For me, I do find the filmmaking so fascinating and compelling that I do enjoy it. Cameron has remastered this movie in 4K and HDR, and when that comes out on 4K Blu-ray, I will buy it just to look at this movie is going to look fucking gorgeous in HDR. All the luminescence and the color and all of that stuff will benefit so much from that. I'm very excited for that. But I could watch it on not on mute, because the James Horner score is extraordinary, and as James Horner always was, I think it's great. But I would vastly prefer a version of Avatar with, like, 70% less dialogue and, like, 60% less plot. And it just, like, the good version of Avatar to me would be if there was no human main character and it was just about Na'vi characters, and they don't speak English, they just speak Na'vi. Maybe they don't even communicate verbally. Who the hell knows? They're aliens and they're just going around their planet doing cool shit. That would not get a $300 million production budget, so that will never exist. But yeah, that's my ramble opening thoughts on this movie.
Yeah, I think one thing is, because I generally agree, and I'll say, while I am pretty negative on the movie overall, in terms of, like, if it's a movie that you stop to think about other than to, like, admire the technical craft, if it's a movie you stop to think about the story being told, it kills the movie immediately. Like, anytime you have an active thought about anything revolving to the storytelling, the movie is like, creatively bankrupt. If you turn your brain off, it's perfectly watchable. It's a super watchable movie. It's, like, too long, but that's not, that's a James Cameron thing. Like, almost all of his movies, of the Terminator 1 are too long. But it makes me think of, when I was watching it, I was reminded of a conversation I had with my older brother, years ago, who, I don't really care that much for this movie. He really loves this movie and has seen it a lot. But the main way he has seen this movie was back in the day as channel surfing, right? Which people don't do anymore. But it was a movie that, if it comes on, you can just watch it, because if you don't think about it, if you came in and you watched 10 minutes of Avatar, you watched a complete scene, every scene is totally fun in and of itself. It's, like, almost to the detriment of the overall structure of the film. Each scene works well as its own little tiny mini drama little thingy. And then a commercial break happens, and you go and you switch to the fucking football game or whatever. And you watch that for 30 minutes, and then a commercial break happens over there. Eventually, you switch back to Avatar. You're, like, 40 minutes later into the movie. You didn't see any of the intervening material, and it doesn't matter, because nothing of interest has happened. Nothing important has happened to the plot. Anything you missed that's an important plot beat is something you can very easily infer has occurred if you've ever seen another movie in your life, and you can just move on. It's a movie that you could start watching the last 15 minutes of and be as entertained by it as if you had watched the full movie, because that's what it has of value, is this very surface level technical craft and like very like sort of chunky direction that's like chunky and like it's something that you can just bite into. It's just like, oh, I can just enjoy this little thing. It's like a potato chip directing. It's just all, yeah, this scene is fun, and I can just keep on watching it with my brain turned off. And if I don't think about any of the substance of it, it doesn't matter. So in that respect, the movie's very watchable. Like I didn't watch it I watched it Friday night, but I didn't watch it like 2 nights ago and was like actively hating the experience. Anytime I just sort of like let my brain turn off and just absorb it a little bit, I was like, yeah, this is perfectly entertaining. And then a line of dialogue would happen or something that would break me back into the like, oh, I'm watching this for the podcast. If I don't think about what I'm watching, I'll have nothing to say on the podcast, and the entire experience collapsed like a fucking House of Cards, basically. Because to me, that's what the movie is that this movie has the opposite problem of a very common thread of criticism you sometimes see in the video game world that I don't generally agree with, almost never agree with, but it's a very common criticism of certain like very story or narrative heavy games in the video game world of like, why do you have cutscenes? Like, why are you trying to be like a movie? You should only be doing things that leans into like what makes video games unique, right? Like thinking about me playing Half-Life, that's one of the things people always say about Half-Life is that it is, because it never breaks the perspective, it's this linear first-person game that doesn't have any cutscenes or anything like that. You're always in the head of Gordon Freeman. It's like a pure video game experience. Why are you playing Halo or whatever and you're this fucking cutscenes and it breaks you out and all that kind of shit? And I don't agree with that criticism, but it's very common that it should be a thing that takes advantage of the unique aspects of the medium and only do that. And Avatar is like the opposite thing. It shouldn't really be a movie. It would be much better as a video game project, because video games can do worlds that you explore, yes. And it's just a world you explore, right? Like, you don't need to know jack shit about the story or characters of Elden Ring to enjoy that game tremendously. Obviously, there is enjoyment to be had if you learn more about the world and you dig into the lore and you know the characters and all that kind of stuff. But the world itself as an object to explore with you as the appropriately enough avatar in there that is just an extension of yourself poking around in that world where you don't have to worry about a dumbass main character like as a cipher and it's just you. That's like uniquely the thing that video games can do. That movies can't do, because movies are fundamentally a narratively driven experience, because it is this edited narrative presented in front of you in direct sequences that you have no control over. And so I wonder if sometimes part of my incredible apathy over Avatar stems from this feeling of like, well, I love cool, elaborate, fantastical world building, but video games do that in a way that's way more engaging to me than like a movie doing that for its own sake. I think is really boring, because why do I care about anything happening in this world? I love the world. I came to love the universe of Star Wars not because I loved reading a Wikipedia page about Salacious Crumb and all that shit. I came to love about the world of Star Wars because I loved Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and Chewbacca and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader, and those characters and their stories is what gets you that buy-in. And then if the world building is interesting, you can branch off of that. Whereas for Avatar, I cannot imagine myself ever being invested in the wider world of like the broader fiction and the fiddly details actually of Pandora, because I don't have that buy-in to make me care about it from the movie, because I don't care about the story and characters. So even if the world building is technically interesting, the manner in which it's presented to me is so off-putting that I can't actually care about Pandora and the Na'vi and any of that stuff.
I definitely thought about this a lot while watching it this time, that because video games, I think, have gone in a direction where it's easier to imagine the Avatar video game than I think it was in 2009. If you gave the right developer all of James Cameron's notes and all of the concept art and all of the science behind and all of the world building they did and said, go make an open world game, you could make an all-timer. Like, it is such a cool world that you could have. The way everything interacts, the way you have all these species very clearly thought out. I was watching the documentary and there's stuff like all the animals are six-legged, and so all the physics are slightly different because they made this decision that there are six-legged creatures on this planet, and they were talking about all this, and I'm like, God, there's so much cool stuff that you could do. The way, like, all the trees interacted, honestly, it reminds me a lot of, like, Sumeru in Genshin Impact. Like, something like that, just taken to 11, big open world. Boy, you could make something special. And I feel like that would be the right outlet for what James Cameron had. Because I don't think James Cameron ever came into Avatar with a sense of... And honestly, I think he would admit this under, like, maybe not freely, but under Truth Serum. I don't think he ever came to it from... I really want to tell a story about a disabled soldier who goes to, blah, 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 right? I think he had an idea of this, like, alien world. It's this cool moon to a gas giant, and it has this ecosystem based on this, this, and this, and everything is interconnected by these electrical currents, and that's how blah, blah, blah. That's a cool idea for a game, and that's not a put down. That's not me saying, oh, it's cool for a game, like, not like that. It's just... It's not really a movie unless you have a clear, like, 3-act plot in mind. He got there. He got a 3-act plot on this movie. There's nothing wrong with the plotting in, like, a 3-act sense. This is structurally a very sound movie. It's just pretty dull, right? It's like the dullest version of that presentation. So, yeah, a lot of what's good about the world building doesn't necessarily shine through. But I think if you took it and you... And, there is a new Avatar game being made, the one by Massive Entertainment that Ubisoft is publishing. And we'll see if that turns out well.
There was also, when timed with the release of this movie, there was a Ubisoft game on, like, the Xbox 360 at the time that was, like, horrifically panned. I've never played it. Called James Cameron's Avatar, the game.
Yeah. They tried it, game. The problem is we never let people make video game movies the way you need to make an actual video game.
Yeah.
And so, now we have some good licensed games, but they're not. It's like, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is not a movie game in the sense that it was on a timeline like Disney telling them this has to be out for Star Wars Episode 9. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's the kind of thing you would need for an Avatar game. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that I think this could do well, because I do think, like, it's a muscular piece of world building in that way. It is, and, like, I almost mean less in, like, the lore. I think when we say world building, we often mean, like, the lore. Like, boy, Middle-earth is a cool piece of world building because Tolkien thought out thousands of years of history and language. It's more like the literal world itself is built out in Avatar. And, like, the physical shape of it, the way things interact, and that's what I like about it. But you're right, a movie... I just think, like, there's nothing to put down on movies. That's not the thing movies are best for in that sense. And I do think that shines through here, where when it almost feels like they really did, like, I think, make an effort to tell the simplest, stupidest story so that they could do all the cool technical shit, and, like, get paid for it.
Yeah, but it's just, it makes for an extremely frustrating viewing experience, because it's a thing where, like, again, everything I can admire on this very technical level, but it's like, but I can't engage with it because there's nothing there to be engaged with. It's a thing that I get to admire from the distance, because a lot of this movie is like, and this will contribute to when we talk about some of, like, the very kind of racist elements of what this movie is. Like, it's this exotic tourism thing, right? You get this exotic tour of this exotic planet and you get to admire it from a distance, but you don't get anything actually. It's not actually a lived-in experience. This movie doesn't actually care about the Na'vi in any really meaningful way. The Na'vi are not they get a language, which is cool, and it's got a constructed, or conlang, a constructed language that is very sophisticated. So it's like there's a technical element there. I don't know why it's not subtitled for the Na'vi speaking, which is, I think, another problem, particularly by the time the main character understands their language. It should have...
Wait. What do you mean not subtitled?
Did I not have the subtitles on when I was watching? Is it subtitled?
I don't know how you couldn't, because the subtitles are... maybe you had a weird version. It's in papyrus. It's a famous part of this movie is that all the subtitles are in the typeface papyrus, which looks terrible, but is kind of funny. And yes, no, it's all subtitled. Yeah, there's tons of subtitles.
It's weird. I must have had a setting turned off. But, I mean, not that I missed anything.
No.
It's not like the movie was less understandable. It was more a technical point of like, oh, I didn't remember this not having subtitle dialogue. Regardless. But the conlang of the Na'vi's language is very, like, technically impressive. A lot of work went into making a real, like, language out of what the Na'vi say. But other than that, the Na'vi don't really have a history, right? As you're saying of, like, there's no lore in this movie, the Na'vi aren't granted, like, the privilege of having, like, a real history and culture that you ever engage with in a meaningful way. It's there are things that are there that are technically like cultural elements of the Na'vi, but almost all of them are clearly like worked backwards to be inserted into it to set up some element of the last act of the movie, like them flying on little like pterodactyls is clearly put in there so that they can fight the helicopters, not because it's like, oh, of course the Na'vi would have pterodactyl things instead of just having horse things also. But like it's a part of the problem of the movie is that like it has this technical world building that is quite impressive on like that nature documentary sense, but it doesn't feel like a lived-in real world to me. Like there's some sort of weird contradiction happening there. That because the story is not actually fully invested in, to me, all of that technical world-building excellence goes to waste. Because on paper, it's a really great world. Experientially, it doesn't feel real to me. Like it doesn't feel real to me the way that the world of Alien/Aliens feels real, right? There's a real care that to building in the lives of the people that live on that ship that make all the technology and everything else feel substantial and something that you can grab onto and like tangible. Whereas here, I understand the work that went into building out the biology of the world and the thinking of how all the biosphere and the biome of Pandora interacts with each other on this very complex, very detailed level. But because it's just exotic tourism, all of it feels distant and ephemeral and off on the horizon, not a thing where like, oh, I'm here with you because I care about it, because I'm experiencing it. And there's like a weird sort of dissonance there for me fundamentally at the core of what the movie is doing, because it did not really care about its plot and characters.
I totally understand that, and I think that's true. And I think, we compared it to a video game. The other thing is this is a theme park ride.
Yes.
Like, this is very literally, the first 30 minutes of this movie in particular feel like two things to me. They feel like a really long, incredibly lavish Sega CD cutscene, like setting up, like, Stephen Lang coming and talking to me first person, like, Marine, you're gonna do this for me, blah, blah, like, terrible dialogue, and then I'm gonna pick up a controller and shoot blue aliens or something. Or it feels to me like Star Tours or something at Disneyland where you're in the box and there are things coming at you in 3D, Mm-hmm. And this has always been an issue with this movie for me, like particularly early on, like the first 30 minutes or so, in 2D, it feels like something's missing. It feels like this just was never meant to be watched this way. It's like when I watch a YouTube recording of Star Tours or the Back to the Future ride or something like that. And Avatar does have a big theme park in Disney's Animal Kingdom in Orlando, Florida, at Disney World. I have never been to it. The last time I was at Disney World was before that opened. But what I have heard from like theme park, because there are big theme park enthusiasts out there in the world who like that is their favorite thing in the world is theme parks, right? And what they will say is that Disney's Avatar Adventure, whatever it's called, is like probably the height of the craft. Like it is, they had all the documentation, all the art, and they made something ludicrously, insanely lavish and beautiful and just like incredible based on it. But it's hard to kind of care about it because it's about a property no one has any attachment to,
Yes.
And that's the thing. It's sort of like, man, if people loved Avatar, I imagine that thing would be selling out every day the way like the Harry Potter world at Universal does or something, right? But like, yeah, or if it were like just built to be a theme park, like there was never a movie attached, it would be like there are rides like that at Disneyland, like they've had movies now, but you know what I mean, like the Haunted Mansion and Pirates and stuff like that. But the movies very much came second. So I think all of that is something that this movie has in common with. But yeah, it as a movie in terms of story, it fails. As a movie in terms of filmmaking craft, it is incredible. And I do just want to start, because it is the most important part of the movie, let's face it. We can complain about the plot. This movie doesn't exist for the plot. It exists for the special effects. And I do think there's something about having had a decade plus of deteriorating cinematic special effects that Avatar is kind of a revelatory experience. I think my new answer to when people ask me, like, why are you so upset with Hollywood effects these days, Jonathan? I get that from my students sometime who don't remember, like, good movie special effects. It's just like, well, yeah, all movies look like actors who aren't on set together standing in front of a green screen, and it's flat and there's no dimension to it. That's what Spider-Man looks like. That's what Spider-Man has always looked like, right? And I'm like, watch the Sam Raimi movies, kids. It's not what Spider-Man always looked like. I think my new answer to people who ask me that would be, go watch Avatar. Like, I think Avatar has an actual like depth of production value that is just missing now. I think when you look at like these scenes and how they are, and sometimes it's purely animated, and sometimes it's composites of animation and live action and other kinds of elements, but there is a thoroughness to it. There is a put togetherness. Everything blends, everything is lit, everything has motion and weight. Sometimes the textures look a little dated because this is a 13-year-old movie, but I think there are so many other elements that are so beyond what you would see today. I mean, God, compare this to like Thor Love and Thunder from over the summer, where it's just everybody is standing in front of an LED screen and it's painfully obvious for every shot of that movie that that's what's going on, and just nothing is lit and nothing has any relation to what's anything else. And it really is impressive what's going on here. And I think the key filmmaking choice Cameron made, and I watched the movie thinking this, and then I saw the documentary, and he talks about this, so my instinct was right, is that he very much shot this movie for the illusion. Even though this movie is mostly animated, it is quote-unquote shot to look like a live-action movie. It looks like every shot of this was they took a camera into the world and shot it. It's just they did that for a world that doesn't exist. And so all of the filmmaking choices feel like they're from an actual like live action movie that you would go out and shoot, and then the special effects have to execute at a level where it sells you that illusion. And I do think that is the key breakthrough Avatar has that does put it above a lot of other movies in this specific department, is just the way he moves the camera and the way he cuts and the way he has things move within shots. None of it feels like it is special effects photography. It feels like it's photography, even though anything that they did on the volume stage literally wasn't photography. They had special cameras that caught all of the mocap stuff, but mostly they caught the mocap data. And then, the big actual technical innovation for how he directed this, which I think is fascinating, is on the volume stage. They had hundreds of cameras to catch all of the mocap data. On the actors themselves, one of the innovations this movie made was putting a camera like tied to a helmet right in front of their face, so you could get eye detail and stuff like that, so they don't have the dead eye problem, which it's actually hilarious. James Cameron just directly throws the movie Beowulf under the bus in the bonus features. He says he visited the set of Beowulf and realized they had it all wrong, basically, which is hilarious, because if you've seen Beowulf, James Cameron is correct. He did it better than Beowulf. So you have all of that, and then Cameron has a big monitor, and there is an active real-time render going on his screen of what the shot will look like in the movie with the actual, because they've rendered all of the space of Pandora, what's going to be in that shot, what the character model is going to look like. It's not finished. It's obviously like there's no textures on anything, but he has it in his hand what it will look like, and so he can shoot every scene on that volume stage like it's a live action movie, and you're just looking at the viewfinder and what you have. And that's the kind of thing where there is such intentionality behind every filmmaking choice and every cut and what is in every shot and how scenes are composed. And that's the kind of thing that when I look at a Marvel movie now, and I know I beat up on Marvel, but that's because they make 90% of what goes into theaters. That's what's missing. Like, you often get the sense in a Marvel movie that the director, and this is true, this is not me making it up, the director doesn't know what's going to be going on that green screen later.
Yeah.
Like, the Russo brothers directed the climax of Avengers Endgame to be in a forest. The climax of Avengers Endgame is not in a forest, if you've noticed, and that's because they just decided to do it differently in post. And I don't know if it was even the Russo brothers' call, but someone decided along the way to do it in post. And so there's an actual active disconnect between whatever the filmmaking was and what winds up on screen. And that gap is so closed in Avatar that that's what sells the illusion. And that's what I do think makes it more complex than saying this is just an animated movie. Like, there is something else going on in terms of imagining how to use the tools of animation to make a live action movie, where I do think, like, in terms of film language, film semiotics, this is a live action movie, even if it is mostly animated, and that is fascinating to me. Like, that is a really interesting thing. And then you have a lot of movies that have similar levels of CGI now that I think are very unsure of how to do that blend. And it's just, we'll shoot it on a stage, we'll use very flat lighting, and then underpaid VFX artists will close the gap later. And it really is night and day when you look at it. There's a lot of lessons you can learn from the filmmaking here that just have not been learned by the industry, and that frustrates me.
And the thing that's hilarious is that there is an industry that learned all those lessons. It's just not Hollywood, because that's exactly how
Yes.
video game cutscenes are made, right? Like everything you're
Right.
describing and they took it from Avatar, right? So Avatar like innovated wildly in this space. But like if you've ever seen any of the behind the scenes stuff for like any Naughty Dog game or like Red Dead Redemption 2, any of that kind of stuff, listen to interviews with the actors, like everything you're describing is exactly the process that those games use to create their cutscenes. And you have the actors are in those suits and they have cameras all over the place. They have the camera on their face, and then you have someone who has a camera rig with a like very sort of rudimentary version of whatever the game character models and environment is that they're using to shoot on a big like soundstage with like props and stuff like that. And this is like one of like the weird things about watching Avatar now in 2022 is that it feels like video game cutscenes, because technology used in Avatar was taken up much more directly by the video game industry. And like obviously there are other movies that have done some of the things that Avatar did, but the video game industry does it all the fucking time with big budget AAA video games, and has for years at this point. And so it is like in reverse, it almost made the movie at times feel more fake to me in 2022 than it did at the time, because I no longer associate this like the style of filmmaking is some of the way that like that technique comes across as a viewer with movies. I associate it with video games, and it's like very weird the way
But
those synapses get rewired at a certain point.
But that's a really positive legacy of Avatar.
Yes.
That is, because the games you just named, like Naughty Dog games, or I think the best example is Red Dead 2.
Yeah.
Red Dead 2 has better live-action filmmaking, even though it's fully animated, than most live-action movies today.
Yes.
Like, its sense of staging and composition and editing and all of that is just out of this world. And I think it's because they've embraced, and this is Cameron, in those bonus features and all of the people working with him, innovated an entire, I think, approach to thinking about special effects that has become very influential, particularly in video games, of thinking look, it's not, all this tech on here is not to replace the actors. Like, Cameron has a whole interview about this on the Disc where he's saying, look, I love actors. The point of this is not to get rid of actors. It's to use the actors more in the making of the effects. And, you watch that, and what comes to mind is the entire career of Troy Baker, who, is almost never in a game where he looks like Troy Baker. But it's impossible to imagine someone else playing Joel, even though Joel and Troy Baker look nothing alike, you know? But there's that digital makeup, basically, is what it is. It's not animation. It's like digital makeup on top of him. Not to erase the work of digital animators who do phenomenal work, and there is extra work involved there, but that's the ethos of it, right? And that's this thing Avatar innovates. But that also means, and I think this is another lesson that Hollywood has forgotten and video games have learned, is you have to trust the technology. You have to embrace it. Like Avatar, they did actually do a lot of stuff physically. So this movie has a costume designer who was not like a computer expert. She was a costume designer. She built costumes. And every single costume in the movie was physically made and sewn by her department, so that it could be worn and they could understand the physics of it. And then they sent all that detail to Weta Digital, and Weta animated it in the movie. But the costumes were all done completely real, and the actors wore them and understood them. And they spent several days out in jungles in South America playing out scenes from the movie so the actors would understand it when they were back on the volume stage. None of that's in the movie, but they did it for the experience. But when they're on the volume stage, they put the dots on everyone, they used the camera rigs, they embraced the technology. And when I see that, it makes me laugh, because we now have this raft of movies that think they're better than that. So, the infamous example, because it sunk the whole movie, is, it's one of the things that sunk the whole movie, is Tom Hooper's Cats, where he wanted to do this whole thing where we have the digital fur, but he decided, we don't need all these dots, we don't need mocap, we don't need a special stage. I'll just film the actors, and then the animators, they're great. They'll figure it out, and it'll be fine. And it was an absolute nightmare for the animators, because they had to frame-by-frame rotoscope every single actor in the movie out and replace them with fur, and they didn't have one iota of mocap data. They just had reference animation, and that's why the work in that movie is so bad, because it couldn't be good. It literally, there is no way to make it good when you just don't use the technology. Smaller extent, but I also think, and this is me criticizing someone I don't usually criticize, Martin Scorsese did something similar in The Irishman, and to my understanding, this is why The Irishman was so expensive. The Irishman cost almost how much Avatar cost, and that's because he didn't want to put dots on Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci and Al Pacino. That makes it a lot more expensive, and it makes it a lot harder. And I think there's this thought that, like, well, that'll impede the performances, won't it? And it's like, performances have been technologically augmented since the day we started shooting movies.
Yes.
It's all technologically augmented. It's funny, like, you hear Zoe Saldana and Sam Worthington talk about it in the bonus features, and they're like, well, it's still less bad than sitting in a makeup chair. Like, it's fewer hours than it would be. Like, they have to put all these dots on my face. But like, Zoe Saldana knows what she's talking about. She is a actor who's often done prosthetics performances. This is a version of that, but the prosthetics are less egregious on the actor's side. So I just think that's all interesting too, because it's impossible for me to imagine like Naughty Dog making a game where they're like, you know what, Troy? Don't put on the dots. We'll figure it out later, right? Uh-huh. Like, no, they're going to trust the tech they have and understand it's all part of the artistic process, and everyone's adult enough to get that, right?
Yes, yeah. That, like, there needs to be that kind of team collaborative effort between the actors, the directors, and then the special effects, in like how all those things come together. And everyone needs to understand that this is all, that the product you're making is made through the cumulative effort of everybody combined, and not, you know, the stars are like the most important part, and so you can't put them in a silly outfit that has the weird triangles and stuff on it to track their motion. It's like, no, you know, put on the weird tights. You know, you are an actor. Actors have been wearing weird tights for hundreds of years. It's totally fine. You know, it's like, you know, yes. Back in the Shakespearean days, they had to like pretend that they were seeing and doing a lot of shit that did not actually exist on that stage. Because, you know, they didn't have an army there to show up for Henry V. You just had to kind of act like there was one somewhere over there, you know, so get over yourselves. Yeah. Like it's definitely one of those things that I find very fun when you get some of those interviews with people who have worked on some of those big video game projects, and actors, and like hearing about their methodology and like the process of how, in some ways, it's like the most pure version of acting because of how much it is like so old school. It's so old school theater. You're just not playing to an audience, but like everything is imagined in this big, like open, empty stage basically, and you are trying to just perform to that imaginary space. And that is literally what acting is.
That's literally what acting is, and that's a constant theme on the Avatar behind-the-scenes stuff, is the actors saying, I actually found it very rewarding as an actor, because Cameron created a system where we could act to our heart's content, and there's a lot, and there was years of pre-production and rehearsal, and like all the Na'vi's movement. Do you know, this is kind of funny, there's so many big names who worked on Avatar, one of whom is the person who did all the coaching on the Na'vi movement is Terry Notary, who went on to be one of the main guys in the Planet of the Apes trilogy. He plays the evil ape in movie 2, and he's in all of them. But he did all like a lot of the ape movement in those, so like a really like genius kind of mocap guy. And so there's like genuinely a lot of acting going on. And you see it all in the finished product. You really do, and that's the goal. Cameron had this line in the bonus features where he said, my goal was to neither diminish nor augment the performance with the mocap. We wanted to get to the mocap to a place where it just was the performance, and it wasn't adding anything or taking anything away. And I feel like that's the right like point of view. And this is the thing James Cameron is genuinely very good at. I think he has a reputation for being kind of a dictator on set, and that's probably earned. I think part of that is that I don't get the sense that he like coddles anyone or treats anyone, like gives anyone the special treatment. It is very much every department, every person has a role, and I'm empowering everyone. But we got to get the job done, because if you're making a movie like Titanic or Avatar, you can't fuck around and be like coddling people's egos, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing I just want to point out versus a lot of other movies, if you're wondering why Avatar looks good in ways that a lot of current movies don't, it's because Avatar had those years of pre-production. Yeah. And this is a lesson we've learned a couple of times in the last decade. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings had years of pre-production. Avatar had years of pre-production. Peter Jackson's King Kong had years of pre-production. All of the 2000s era movies that had these just amazing, groundbreaking effects. Part of that is because before they rolled one frame of film through the camera or one pixel through the digital camera, they had so much of it ready to go. They knew what it was going to look like. An animator is going to be able to make much better animation, even if it is on older equipment, if you have a number of concept artists doing drawings, and you have maquettes, which are like the clay puppets they make to like really simulate all the physics of the character. And if you have time to do all of that and develop the language and train the actors and all of that stuff, you're just going to wind up with better effects than, people, the artists working on Marvel movies now have much more sophisticated technology than anyone had access to in Avatar in 2009, but those movies are made effectively with little to no pre-production. The director comes on set, shoots it, and then leaves. And that's an oversimplification, I know, but the pre-production times are very, very slashed. A really obvious example of this was Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, where instead of having his years of pre-production, Guillermo del Toro quit, they made him make the movie, and he just had to kind of go. And so the Hobbit movies have special effects that are all over the place. Gollum looks great because they knew how to do Gollum. Smaug looks great because they put in the time to get Smaug right. The orc dude, Azog, he don't look good. A lot of the effects with like the dragon getting showered in golden ore near the end of movie 2 looks terrible because that's a scene they made 5 months before the movie came out and stuff like that. And I just think that's also a lesson where you can't have special effects at the scale of Avatar if you're making 4 movies a year with the same people and none of them have pre-production time.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, like that preparation is everything. Like if you go in to a special effects heavy production and you do not have, if you don't know what the fuck it is that you're shooting, you're like everybody. That team thing breaks down, right? And so everybody they're all on different pages. Nobody's on the same page anymore because you haven't done all that work to build up everything and sort of scaffold everything up to the moment of like, okay, now we're going to like shoot it. Like the shooting part of it should be in many ways like the fastest part of the whole fucking thing because you have already prepared everything so that once you get to shooting, you know exactly what you're going to shoot.
Yeah. So, again, my point is not just to endlessly bash on the movies of today, but it is, and this has been a theme through a lot of the movies, Sean, that we've looked back on, like Lord of the Rings and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and certain Batman movies and stuff like that. It's just, I do think there is some institutional knowledge of how to make these movies that has disappeared a little bit. And I think that's a bummer because you look at something like Avatar and it's like, okay, maybe you don't love the story of Avatar and that stuff, but surely you can imagine that level of technical, sophistication put towards a story you do care about, right? And then it's like, oh, but I don't know if we're ever getting that again other than in Avatar 2, and we'll see how that is, Yeah. I guess the other thing is I don't know if we're cultivating a film atmosphere where the next James Cameron can come out of that. James Cameron came up working with people like Roger Corman and worked with on early sci-fi spectacles like the Alien franchise and was handed all this work done by like H.R. Geiger and Ridley Scott. Like Cameron, I think, is a unique talent, but he also came up in a industry that like cultivated that talent, and I don't know what the equivalent of that is now.
Yeah. Yeah, it is definitely a very like stark contrast. I mean, to be fair, we do every once in a while we'll get something like, I mean, Dune obviously was something I thought about watching this of like, like Dune has better special effects than Avatar. Obviously, like the nature of the special effects are also different. They don't have to replace every single person with a giant blue cat person.
Right.
But like Avatar does look dated in a lot of sequences. Like you can tell that the technology has shifted. Some of like the way the skin looks occasionally on the avatars or on the Na'vi, you can tell that like the way that subsurface scattering is handled in terms of the light was not fully there because it was 2009. You can like some of the facial animation stuff is a little. There's a few shots that look a little LA Noire-esque in terms of like, okay, you're maybe like haven't found the right balance between the motion capture and the hand animation because again, this is like a new approach to blending some of that stuff together. So there are ways in which it looks dated. There are some shots that look fucking unbelievably good still. Like every once in a while you will get a money shot that doesn't look dated in the slightest, and those are very impressive. Like the shots where Jake ends up in the water looks so good. The water simulation is fucking crazy good in this movie. And weirdly enough, there's not that much of it, relatively speaking. You know, that's the thing that they're very invested in for the sequel, to do like lots of water stuff. But you get a couple of good water shots, mostly him washing away in that river, and it looks really, really fucking good. But there are also lots of sequences where you're like, okay, yeah, like this is an older movie. And if you compare it to something like Dune from last year, it is, you know, special effects have come a very long way. It's just that the majority of special effects heavy movies we get are Marvel movies that, despite the fact that all the tools are super advanced, if the methodology doesn't make effective use of those tools, which obviously is not an issue with the special effects artists, it is an issue with the production team filming the movie and not having pre-production and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter how advanced your tools are, you're going to get incredibly inconsistent, generally bad-looking results, you know, with like the nadir so far being Thor: Love and Thunder. And that was definitely like a lot of the stuff I thought about watching the movie is that exact stuff, that, you know, with these special effects, and thinking, man, every once in a while you get something like Dune from last year, which I have a lot of problems with the storytelling there also, but the special effects were amazing. But generally speaking, you do not get stuff that looks as good as what Avatar looks, even though this is a 13-year-old movie now.
That is the thing I am excited for with the sequel, is it is called The Way of Water. These water shots in the trailer are out of this world, literally. And I am excited for all of that. But yeah, it's you can tell Cameron had the checklist of all the things you have to do with these characters to make it look real. Of, we're going to have a scene in the water, we're going to have a scene where he gets covered in mud, we're going to have a scene where everything is lit by firelight, just like all the biggest challenges you could possibly throw CGI animation. And it really does those things. It does with aplomb. Some of that stuff is amazing, and it adds to the verisimilitude if you can do the challenge and pull it off. Yeah, and, you know, when I talk about visual effects, I want to be clear, and you just said this, it's not because the visual effects artists of today are less talented. I would bet that there are more talented visual effects artists on Earth today than there have ever been. There's probably dozens and dozens of people who could be the next James Cameron. I just worry, are those people toiling away at non-union effects houses on Doctor Strange 2 and Thor: Love and Thunder for not enough money to make sequences that wind up being subpar because they weren't given good direction? And that's the bummer, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, but that's probably enough about that. Do you want to talk about the story, such as it is, of Avatar?
Yeah, because here's like the great tragedy of Avatar, is all that stuff is super true about the special effects. The only problem is that the point of the special effects is that you're trying to tell a fucking movie story with it. And
can I read a quote from Avatar?
Sure.
This is the beginning of the movie. This is the theatrical cut. I did watch the extended cut for this episode, Sean, which is a full 3 hours long. Mm-hmm. It has some interesting stuff. The extended cut, just if you don't know what it adds, is it adds a longer opening on Earth where you see Earth a little bit. You see Jake's life on Earth. You see him get beat up in a bar, because that's what happens to characters at the beginning of movies like this. And you see him like learning about his brother having died. But you don't need any of that.
That's the version that I saw also.
Oh, okay. You did see the full 3-hour version? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you have that. The other biggest thing it adds is that Neytiri has a sister in the extended cut who died and was in fact killed by the U.S., I guess it's not U.S., but the Earth military when Grace's school was destroyed. And while the details about Grace's school getting destroyed are in the theatrical cut, all of those specifics are cut out, which I actually think hurts the movie, because I'm really questioning why Neytiri is giving anybody the time of day, because, yes, boy, that's a much more specific thing that has happened to her.
Yeah, I did not bother to look up what the differences were, and I couldn't remember. And so you listing those off is like, man, all of those things make the movie worse, and putting that in for that extended cut. Yeah, all of those are things that should have been cut and were rightfully cut, because they make the movie worse. Yeah.
Anyway, but this is specifically the version of it in the theatrical cut. It is even worse in the extended cut, but I can't find the quotes for this. Some of it is still in there. But this is the beginning of the movie. This is Jake narrating. In cryo, you don't dream at all. It doesn't feel like 6 years, more like a fifth of tequila and an ass-kicking. Tommy was the scientist, not me. He was the one who wanted to get shot light years out in space to find the answers. And then Jake wakes up. Are we there yet? And then the med tech says, yeah, we're there, sunshine. We're there. And then Jake is narrating. So a week before he was about to ship out, a guy with a gun ends his journey for the paper in his wallet. He's talking about his brother. Yeah, Tommy was the scientist. Me, I'm just another dumb grunt going someplace he's gonna regret. That either sounds like parody dialogue in an intentionally corny military shooter, like maybe the kinds of stuff that Sergeant Johnson would say in Halo 1.
Yes.
It's very, very, or honestly, like the writing in Aliens that I think knows it is satirical, like about the crazy Marine dudes who are intentionally ridiculous and got the point of the assignment. Or it sounds like a teenager who has seen maybe 1.5 film noirs in his life trying to write an angsty film noir narration, made even worse by the fact that Avatar has no business having film noir narration. Yeah. Even if it was really good film noir narration, this is the wrong movie for film noir narration.
It's baffling. Like, the dialogue does feel like James Cameron thought that he could still write the dialogue of Aliens, but it's not fucking 1986 anymore. And like, this movie is, anytime someone says anything, it feels like you're watching a movie from the 80s all of a sudden. It's so weird, and it stylistically just clashes with everything else around it in the most dramatic fashion possible. Because it's like, you can't for 1,000 reasons you can't do that. One is like the dialogue isn't as fun, but it's like stylistically, everything about Aliens is in concert, so that the dialogue makes sense, and that like the cheesy nature of the dialogue that, you know, look, neither of us were born in 1986. I don't know if at the time they considered it cheesy. It reads as cheesy now, but it fits with the whole aesthetic of the movie. Whereas in Avatar, you've got this beautiful, gorgeous, crazy video game Pandora world and all this stuff going on, and your dances with wolves and you know, your racism and all the stuff that the delightful stuff in this movie. And then someone opens their mouth and it's like, are you supposed to be Michael Bihn's character from fucking Aliens? Like, what's happening? Why are you on this planet?
The thing that makes Aliens like genuinely kind of cutting in its own way is that it is very aware of the culture it came out of.
Yeah.
And Cameron is someone who helped shape that culture. He's the credited co-writer of Rambo 2. Mm-hmm. And so he knew, and I don't know if like that was a case where he wrote it and then they kind of like made it dumber and then Aliens was his revenge, which is kind of what it feels like. But Cameron knew what the film culture looked like, and Aliens is a movie where you have a very like hyped up satirical version of the Schwarzenegger, Stallone archetypes, your big military buff guy archetypes. And the actual hero of the movie is Sigourney Weaver, because all of them are incompetent and she knows what she's doing. Like, that's the whole point of that movie, right? Mm-hmm. But Avatar, what's the thing that undercuts that in Avatar? Other than Avatar does think the military is bad because they do bad shit, but like everybody in the movie, whether it is Jake or Sigourney Weaver or Neytiri, all talk stupid. Like, they say dumb things that sound like they're 80s parodies of themselves. Like that, the line that I love because it is maybe the worst line of the movie is the whole, it feels like a fifth of tequila and an ass kicking. But it's all dialogue like that. It's all this like, there's a lot of like 80s slang in it. There's a lot of just lines that feel very dissonant with like, this shouldn't be in a future movie. This is off. And like Aliens, I guess, is a future movie, but Aliens is supposed to feel like a very like dilapidated version of the world. Avatar is not. Like, this is clearly humanity has like some technical prowess, even if they've kind of destroyed their home planet is the indication. But yeah, it's the dialogue is bizarre. To talk about like the extended opening of the extended version where you spend like it's like 15 to 20 minutes on Earth. It is a like long extended piece of the movie where you're on Earth at the beginning, and you have the scene of him in the bar and he punches the dude and beats that guy up because he hit his girlfriend, and all this stuff. And it's something where a really fundamental problem with the movie is that the main character has no characterization really. And any point where he's given characterization, you don't really understand what it is. Because he's the biggest moron in the history of films. Like, he's the stupidest fucking character I have ever had the displeasure of having be the protagonist of a story. I mean, it's just, he spends the full, like, first 30 minutes that he's on Pandora just
mindlessly slapping every single thing he encounters. He just walks up to a plant. It's like, I'm just going to slap this. Here's a tree. Let me slap this tree. Here's a flower. I'm going to slap the flower. Oh, here's like a beautiful like dandelion seed looking thingy falling down. Let me go slap it. Oh, you're mad that I slapped it? I'm going to slap another one. It's like, what the fuck is he doing? Everything he does just reads as so hilariously fucking moronic. And it feels like sometimes the movie is leaning into it and he's supposed to just be a stupid fucking idiot. And sometimes it feels like the movie wants to undercut that and that, no, he's not an idiot. But I have no idea what his character is supposed to be. I don't know what his character arc is supposed to be outside of the, like, you know, outside of the, like, white guilt fantasy of let me just become one of the Na'vi. Like, there's a very, like, basic character arc, but it's not plotted well. It's not set up in any way. Like, there's nothing about him that sets him up as someone who has to unlearn a bunch of bullshit to, like, then, like, grow into being a Na'vi. He's basically presented tabula rasa. He's a blank slate. He says, I'm an empty vessel. He has nothing that he comes into the movie with, despite the fact that he was a Marine who lost the use of his legs and was in some horrible campaign in fucking Venezuela. He probably should have some pretty notable hang-ups about his, like, contribution to, like, military imperialism or something that would tie into the rest of the movie. But he's got fucking nothing. That's it. Like, there's no character arc there, actually. It is the most, like, it's the most the plot has an arc, and he's just sort of attached to it, but we didn't actually give him a specific character arc, and it's infuriating.
It's the movie can't decide whether it is about a wide-eyed Luke Skywalker type character who wants to go adventure and, like, you know, bask in the glow of new things, which he does at some points in the movie, kind of, right? And you could understand that being the main character of this movie, because this is about a character who fundamentally goes out and, you know, rejects one life and embraces a new life. So if you have a character who wants to go see the unknown, that would make sense. But it also wants it to be about a kind of jaded, broken man. This is just the Dances with Wolves archetype. Yeah. A kind of man who's been like Dances with Wolves, he literally runs away from the Civil War and goes out and he's had it with, you know, white civilization, and so he goes and lives with the Native Americans. And they kind of want to do that, but then he also still has loyalty to the Marines. Kind of. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. It's inconsistent from scene to scene what his actual views are because he doesn't really have views. And so you're absolutely right. It's a completely empty shell of a character. I don't think Sam Worthington is great here, but I also would never really criticize him for this movie because I don't know what he's supposed to play. Like, I think you could have put anyone in this part, and I think you would have gotten a pretty milquetoast performance because I'm not sure what there is to play.
Yeah. Like, I think a big problem that, like, I encountered with him pretty early in the movie is that I really have no idea with this specific scene what is the character meant to be and what is he supposed to be doing. And that's when he first encounters the Na'vi village and all of that stuff, and he ingratiates himself to them. Is that scene supposed to be he's legitimately just, like, kind of an idiot, but he's a well-meaning idiot, and so he's able to sort of, like, stumble his way through that scenario? Or is he actually being actively duplicitous and acting, like, thinking, I'm going to ingratiate myself to them in order to follow up on the orders he got from the Marine general evil guy, the head of security or whatever, who before that whole sequence happens tells him, like, hey, you're our guy on the inside. We need you to give us intel on the Na'vi. Is he doing this on purpose to get intel or not? I have absolutely no idea. Because, like, it doesn't seem like the way he's characterized that he's smart enough to be duplicitous, that or that he's mean enough to try to trick them on purpose. But the whole way the sequence is set up in the plotting tells you that that's what it has to be. Or why did you have that scene earlier about him getting intel? Like, why would you use that to set up the sequence if it's not going to be involved in this sequence at all? I have no idea.
It's that confusion over if he is if he's just kind of a well-meaning idiot, that's fine. That can be a good protagonist if it's. But then you have to do the kind of like wide-eyed, hero's journey sort of thing, right? He wants to go discover the world, but he's kind of naive. That's fine. That's a lot of stories do that, and that's good. Or you could do the sort of liar gets revealed story, which Avatar kind of is, where he is duplicitous, he's working for the bad guy, but by the time the bad guy makes his move, he's learned that he was wrong, the hero has, and so abandons the bad guy. But if you're going to do that, then I feel like Jake needs to pay a little more for his sins, because his sins do lead to their entire home tree being destroyed in the most, like, upsetting sequence of the movie. And I don't think, other than kind of limply saying he's sorry, Jake ever really, like, has to own what he did. Because also the movie can't decide whether he was an active participant in it or not, right?
Yeah, there's no
so
point
it wants
at
to
which
do
I can
both
tell-
things.
I can never tell, is he actually ideologically aligned with the Marines at the beginning of the movie or not? Like, I have no idea, because he doesn't express an opinion on anything ever. Like, it's just, he just sort of like goes with the flow and says like, yeah, okay, to everybody he encounters for the first like 2 hours of this movie. It's fucking infuriating.
He does that, but then also in all of the scenes with the Na'vi, there is never, ever a scene with the Na'vi where he seems duplicitous towards them. He always seems earnestly like, hey, Neytiri seems cool. Hey, this village, this seems like a great society and culture they have. Hey, we're going to go fly on the back of this, big pterodactyl thing. That's awesome. He never has a like, haha, these stupid savages. That's never his view in the movie. And so, yeah, it cannot nail down a characterization, and that is a pretty big problem for your movie, I would say.
Yeah, that your main character has no characterization is a problem. Yeah. Because, the whole middle stretch of the movie, which is like almost like a full hour of basically a sequence of like repeated montages, more or less, of him training or whatever, there's like a shocking lack of actual interaction with the Na'vi and stuff like that in that section. And a part of that is that there's no scene that you would expect to see of him talking to the chieftain or talking to Neytiri and like getting something out of them. Like, we don't see him get a specific piece of intel that's important and then bring that intel back to the Stephen Lang character. Like, you get the suggestion that is happening within these montages. You get scenes where he's interacting with a Na'vi. You get scenes where you see from a distance that he's telling the Stephen Lang character something. But no, there are no details there. And so there's no real meaningful continuity in a plot sense that you're able to grasp onto and see, oh, he has, as a character, made the active choice to get this piece of information, and then later makes the active choice to give this information to the Stephen Lang character, and therefore here is the sin he's committed that he then must sort of pay for later when he's revealed as a liar, and then ascend from that to become the leader of the native population, which we'll have to unpack all the white savior shit there. But none of the actual meaningful pieces of the plotting are executed in this movie. They only suggest at the broad plotting so that you get the effect of the plot arc that you can follow along with your brain turned off. But none of the actual substance of it is actually even executed on. Even when the subject matter is, like, for me, pretty deeply problematic in what the plot arc is, I'd at least appreciate if they executed the plot arc appropriately and, like, thoroughly enough, for me to be able to, like, grab onto it in a meaningful way.
Right. Like, this is where the comparison with Dances with Wolves is appropriate, is Dances with Wolves is a extremely competent movie. It does these beats well, and so the discussion you're having with Dances with Wolves is not, is it narratively incoherent or amateurish? It's, is that white savior narrative appropriate? Like the deep stuff, right?
Yeah.
And in Avatar, before you even get to the... And this is almost why it's hard to be offended by the movie, is that it's so incompetent at what it's doing on a narrative level that, I don't know, it's like, I feel like the conversation, I feel like Dances with Wolves is a more sensitive movie to begin with, but I also think the conversation feels more real there because the movie is good at what it's doing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and with Avatar, It's like easy to just sort of like, not even almost notice that it's doing that stuff because of how light everything is in terms of, it's just sort of, let's just move through this scene, let's just move through this scene, let's just move through this scene, and there's nothing meaty or heavy for you to grab onto.
Yeah, that's very true. So yeah, Jake, not a good character, but honestly, almost no one is. This is a realization I had with this movie, is that this movie, one criticism you'll often hear with Avatar is that, oh, the villains are cartoon characters and they're too arch. Rewatching it, I actually realized that is not my problem with this movie. The villains are the best part because Stephen Lang is awesome, and he's just a great character actor who I feel like he's the one person in this movie who like had a clear, firm grasp on what the assignment was, which he's a crazy 80s video game villain, and he goes for broke. And then you have Giovanni Ribisi, who is very good at playing slimy man of the system, doing bad, evil money shit. And is it completely cartoony? Yes. Also, military imperialism is a horrible cartoon evil, so I don't really feel bad about there not being nuance there. And at the very least, there's a take on those characters. Those characters are evil pieces of shit who want money and power. When you go to the Na'vi, when you go to Sigourney Weaver, when you go to Jake and all the other characters, I don't think the movie has anywhere near that level of clarity on them. Even if it's the very simplistic clarity of the Stephen Lang character, it's clarity. The character works. When you get to the other characters, I don't, other than, like, Sigourney Weaver is a great actress, so some of this is papered over, but, like, that character wants to ingratiate herself with and help the Na'vi. I guess that's her one goal. But, like, how does she account for the fact that she's working with the military on all this? Does she feel she has culpability for what happened? Because she absolutely does. Does she think it's okay to be doing, like, these kind of, like, assignments where you're going and teaching them our language like old school missionaries? Like, there's none of that is explored. When you get to the Na'vi, they want to live in their home, which is perfectly fair as, real world motivation. But there's nothing we don't learn about their culture and their beliefs beyond the absolute surface. So it feels like everyone is a sketch. And honestly, because of that, the characters who are the most two-dimensional feel the most filled into me, and that is Giovanni Ribisi and Stephen Lang.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Like, the two villains are, like, incredibly cliche. They are the most cliche villains you could have. They are the biggest. Oh, this is just, you're just putting 80s movie characters into this movie made in 2009, yes, characters in the whole thing. But at least the, like, performance is entertaining enough and the whole perspective is consistent enough that, yeah, like, it fundamentally works relative to what works in the story for this film. Compared to the Sam Worthington character, Jake Sully, who at times feels like he's supposed to... He talks a lot like Aliens characters, but he's got no consistent characterization in any stretch of the film. Whereas the villains do at least have that. But yeah, all the other characters in the movie are kind of nothing. I think, like, Zoe Saldana as Neytiri, like, if the movie invested in that character more, I think that's probably the character to me that is the closest to feeling like a real character, partially because I think Zoe Saldana does a really good job, partially because, like, she at least has, like, a little bit of stuff in the movie, but also it has, like, the classic problem of the whole last act of this movie, she should be really the kind of the main character at that point, but they can't let her be the main character because she's a girl. So let's have the guy do all the actual important stuff, even though she's the daughter of the chieftain, and so on and so forth. It's, like, clearly really her story at that point. And you can imagine an alternate world version of Avatar that Neytiri is either the main character or she is on at least if equal footing with Jake Sully. That is a much better version of this story. But she ends up feeling very sidelined ultimately in the version of the movie that we get.
She's phenomenal in this movie. Like, on a technical level, like, Zoe Saldana's performance, when you look at how physical it is, how much she has the physicality down, I mean, it's Andy Serkis-esque at times. Like, she really, it's a full-bodied performance. The voice, like, the accent that she chooses, her fluency with the fake language, everything she does is fantastic. I think the writing, as you just laid out perfectly, fundamentally lets her down in very big ways. That doesn't take away from that she's brilliant at this. She is one of the great, like, prosthetics actors of our time. When you look at this, or Gamora in Guardians of the Galaxy, and other stuff. I wish, honestly, she had more chances to act just as herself in her own skin, because I think she's a, wonderful, compelling actress. But, like, she's excellent in this. Like, better than I think the movie deserves.
Yeah, because it's the thing where her and then Sigourney Weaver is very compelling in a very Sigourney Weaver way, but her character is nothing. You pointed out the main issues. I mean, if we want to talk a little bit about that thematic stuff, this movie is so mind-numbingly naive about the nature of, like, the subject matter it's invoking.
Yes.
Because I did not remember anything about that the Sigourney Weaver ran a school that was teaching them English and all this stuff. And the way the movie is so sort of like gullible about this distinction between like the military and the scientists, and the military are the ones who are like the bad colonialists, and the scientists, they're just like, humanitarians, and they're just interested in learning and studying more. They're not doing anything wrong here. When it's like the history of colonialism and imperialism is that the scientists are, as if not in some ways, more culpable for like the wide-ranging impacts of imperialism. It's not the military goes out and they enforce all this shit. But like the scientists and the philosophers and those people are the ones who create the broad like ideological structures that the military are the ones that go and enforce, that wipe out cultures, that exterminate people. And the way in which they broadly invoke the real world historical destruction of Native American cultures, and the ways in which Native American children were like abducted and attempted to be indoctrinated into like at the time contemporary white American culture by teaching them English, by making them dress like white people, by teaching them manners, and so on and so forth, like, which is a real world horrifying thing that happened. And it like broadly invokes it. I don't know if the movie / James Cameron is aware of this stuff, or if he just like somehow really stupidly just stuck his foot in a thing he has no idea the broader history around. But talking about like, oh, we taught them English. And it's like, oh, this is my school where I taught them English, and saying that a bunch of times, and that the movie never understands that to have been an arm of the exact same thing that the Stephen Lang character is doing. He's just going out and shooting them. She's going out and erasing their culture. The movie never addressing that or being acknowledging it or seeming evenly aware of that that's a dynamic is like offensively naive to me.
Oh yeah, I think naive is the right word, because this is not me absolving the movie, but I think it's very, very clear that just the thought wasn't put into that side of it, right? Like, why is there a school where they learned English? Is that because James Cameron affirmatively thinks that's a good part of colonialism and we should do it? Probably not. I think it's there because the Na'vi need to speak English for Jake to ingratiate himself with them, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's a part of these stories usually. Why would that be a part of Dances with Wolves? Because of actual real-world things done to the Native Americans, right? And so you just borrow it and put it in here completely thoughtlessly, And he's also not going to do the, like, Terrence Malick New World thing of having long impressionistic sequences where they learn the language together by moving their bodies in time with the sun, and like it's beautiful. And that's the New World is the only movie that's ever done this well from a white filmmaker. But we're not going to do that in Avatar. So yeah.
And then along those lines, I think like the existence of unobtainium, which has been long memed, in this movie, of the how stupid that fucking name is. Another thing that feels like weirdly 80s about this film. Unobtainium, yes. But also a thing that contributes to its naivete around like the scope of what like colonialism is. The fact that like, it's not about unobtainium / gold, which is like the clearest historical parallel. It's like everything about this planet and its people would be seen as like a resource to be exploited or indoctrinated or brought into the mechanisms of colonialism, right? It would be the trees, it would be the land, it would be the water, the food, the animals, obviously the gold and the metal and the rocks and all that, and the people. It would be the Na'vi themselves would be seen as a resource. That is why you teach them English, is so that you can turn them into workers / slaves. Like the fact that it's just like they just scapegoat everything around this like weird unobtainium, this vague mineral something that does something. It doesn't give you any actual meaningful stuff around it, but it just, the whole presence of that dumbs down the whole movie in a way that I think is unnecessary. You don't need a MacGuffin for colonialism to operate. Like, you can just say like, yeah, we want like those trees. We want those people. We want to take their home because we're going to use all the stuff there. We're going to take all of it because that's what we're here to do. We're here to take it all. It doesn't have to be an unobtainium. It's like it's such an unnecessary MacGuffin to try to ease over all like the uncomfortable elements of what they're doing by just making it very simple. But it doesn't need to be made more simple. Like it's just it's frustrated me watching the movie again and seeing how all that stuff is used.
Well, exactly, because what would the real purpose of the colonialism be, especially in a world where they're very clear that humanity has, this is like a post-global warming future where we fucked up our planet, right? well, then probably they want to go to Pandora to live there, right? Like, we would settle it. We would colonize it. We would, like, there's no indication. It feels like what they're positing in this movie is that if Stephen Lang and Giovanni Ribisi get all their unobtainium, they'll just leave and go back. And, like, if that's how simple colonialism was, then sure, right? Like, the Na'vi would be like, well, we're not using it. If you're going to leave, you can have it. Take it, and then go. That'd be great. If the Native Americans could have gotten rid of the white men by saying, oh, you just want this gold? Oh, okay, here. Will you leave now? That was easy. That's not how colonialism works.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's stupid. It's really stupid. And this is, the movie I will say again and again, I'm going to invoke in this conversation of like the counterpoint to all of this is Terrence Malick's The New World, which is the only movie ever made by a white guy who I think actually gets the fucking dynamics of like the Native American settlement and all of that, and that like this like dream we have of, because the movie presents sort of the dream version of colonization and then also shows it falling apart, and the fundamental like insolubility of it, that it just isn't real. There's it's a violence. Pocahontas becomes the main character of that movie, and she dies for it at the end, and and she dies with a different name on a different continent and all this stuff. Like, and these are just the kind of depths that like Avatar is so naive about, because it's so weird. The Na'vi are so coded as Native Americans.
Yes.
Like, it so goes beyond just, it's a general, in an American context, if you're telling a colonizing story, we will generally align the white people with the white people and the other people with the Native Americans, because that is our history. And you could get that even without the heavy coding, but they go way beyond that. Yeah. The coding is just immense and heavy and big, and like, they are big blue Native Americans, basically, which that on its own is offensive. But then I don't think the movie has anything to say other than imperialism is bad, which, great. You got the minimum here. Imperialism is indeed bad. But I don't think it understands how or why it's really bad. It understands it in like what I was just laying out, in that it's like an unfair exchange of goods and services, not like it's an actual imposition and an attempt to like destroy a people and their culture. And it's just wrong in the point of view it decides to tell it through, Yeah. And again, the New World is a good counterexample here, because it does have the Colin Farrell character early on as sort of our entry point, but then it very evenly shares that POV and overall becomes the story of the Pocahontas character, and the person being imposed upon, and that exchange of cultures and its violence. And there's no attempt to ever get inside the heads of the Na'vi. There's no Na'vi character who becomes a deuteragonist or another POV. It's Jake, it's the white guy. And it is also this fantasy of like, the Native Americans were just better and purer, and we just, man, it's, white people are so bad, we should just go become them, which is its own kind of pandering to these people, yes. And it's its own kind of racism. It's this neoliberal kind of racism, I think.
Yeah, because there's a lot in all this. Because one thing I'll say is like I don't even think the movie really actually even can, because it's so naive, because it's so ignorant to the mechanisms that it's invoking. I don't even think the movie really even can positively state that imperialism is bad, because it doesn't know what imperialism is. If at the end of the movie it still doesn't recognize the Sigourney Weaver's culpability in everything that happened, the movie has not affirmatively said that imperialism is bad. It has said that version of imperialism is bad. If only we just had all the scientists come here. If it was just the scientists, it would have been fine. That's what the movie thinks. It's like, the movie doesn't think imperialism is bad. It thinks that the military is bad, which, hey, I agree, the military is bad. But you're not really getting to the substance of those themes.
But the military is bad because it's a tool of a society, not because like just the idea of a standing defense force is in and of its. I guess you could argue that, but that's not the point of this discussion, right? Yeah. It's the military is it's doing something. Stephen Lang isn't there for fun. He's there because the society has put him there, right?
Yeah, but the movie doesn't know that. Like, the movie does, I think he's there basically because he likes killing the Na'vi. He feels like it really becomes his primary motivation at a certain point. But But anyways, yeah, but to get into the like kind of the white savior stuff and the avatar and that thing, another thing that is like particularly watching the movie removed from it, knowing what the setup and the premise and all of that is, it is like really shocking watching this movie and seeing that the plot never complicates the avatar mechanic, which feels like should be what the story is about, right? Like a thing that the movie is desperately missing is like a notable twist at the end of the second act. Like obviously it has like the big tree gets destroyed, but I mean like something that's like original or specific to this plot and is not just sort of a genericized like the bad thing happens and so we now move into the third act, because it feels like any Saiyan movie with this whole setup, there would be a twist at the end of the second act of, oh, like the avatars are people too, right? Like this isn't just like a mindless flesh puppet. Like we've created a Navi and you have like emptied its soul out or something and you're putting yourself into it, and it is like inherently probably ethically wrong to be engaging in the avatar program in the first place. Like feels like a thing that is where the plot should be going. Like that would be a really stock plot structure, but would be a plot structure very like unique and specific to what this movie is specifically doing, not just the broad strokes of generic like, you know, native white savior story thing. You have created this specific sci-fi premise, but the movie doesn't do anything to actually like engage or interrogate the sci-fi premise it is set up with. And it is a like very wrong feeling premise. I did not remember that at the end of the movie was him getting permanently melded to his avatar body. I could have guessed if I had thought about it that's where it was going. But because they do this whole like setup of Sigourney Weaver of like, oh, is she going to be able to meld permanently with the body? No, and this is a setup that like he's going to do it later in the movie. But then he's almost dying near the end of the movie, and so I was like, oh, now they're going to do the thing. Oh God, does this movie end with him permanently becoming the Avatar and like being fused to that body? Is this truly just White Guilt the movie? That so is it just like I need to shed all of my guilt of being part of the colonial system. And so I must literally shed my body so I can become a Native American and be reborn. That's like, and I've like, that's a very like offensive and racist plot structure. And then he doesn't do that because he gets healed. And I was like, okay, this movie's smart enough not to do that. And then it does it at the end of the movie anyways. And I went on a real journey in the last like 15 minutes of this movie, not remembering how it ended specifically, being like, no, this movie's not that bad, that it is literally going to be him becoming a Native American at the end. Like, imagine if that's literally what Dances with the Wolves was like he literally physically transformed literally into a Native American, and it was just red face, and that's it. Like, it's such, if you strip the metaphor off of it, it is such a like pit in your stomach, uncomfortable concept that clearly nobody really thought about what they're doing, because like if all you have to do to make it feel like the grossest thing in the world is strip the metaphor off and make it more literal, probably it's not a plot point you should be doing in the first place.
This is what I wanted to say, Sean. This is actually a good test for any allegory. Is this an apt or like acceptable allegory? Think about what it would actually be if it wasn't an allegory, and if it makes you go, ick, that's wrong, then it's a bad allegory, right? And like, this is a bad allegory, because you're correct. Dances with Wolves, he does, I mean, the movie's title, that is the name he is given by the tribe, is Dances with Wolves. But like, I think the thing that touches people about that movie is that he doesn't change his body. He, as this person, like, ingratiates himself with these people by his actions and his like attitude, and he is accepted into the tribe. And yes, it is absolutely a white guilt story, but it's a very, very different order of magnitude than if he literally entered a different body at the end. Like, there are actual historical stories of like people joining tribes and stuff like that, right? Like, this is not a thing that never happened. There are no actual historical stories of like, you know, John Dunbar getting mind melded into the empty shell body of a comatose Native American and then taking over their identity. I mean, God, because the other details that, did you hear at the beginning of the movie how the avatars are made? They took the DNA of the Na'vi and cloned them.
Yeah.
That's horrible. That's, like, if you heard about that, if we heard the U.S. military was taking the DNA of Native Americans and attempting to clone empty bodies that our soldiers would then inhabit, we would rightly be horrified. Like, go set the White House on fire horrified, right? Like, that's what's going on in this movie, and it's not only just never questioned, it's just unquestionable. It's just what the movie is. Like, the movie is called Avatar, but it has no interest in making the idea of being an avatar an actual thematic concern or question. It's only a net positive. You know, I have seen some good writing from some trans critics saying this movie connects with them. Specifically, the one I've seen is Emily Vanderwerf has written about this. She retweeted that piece the other day, and I love her as a writer. She's a really great thinker, and she was talking about acknowledging all these other problems, but saying there's a part of her that doesn't resonate with the whole idea of someone being in a body that doesn't feel right to them. They're able to go into this other body and live a new life, and they're treated differently. And there is something to that. And obviously I am not in my cis body here going to say that a trans person is wrong for thinking that about this movie. I guess the only difference I would posit is that I feel like you can see a pretty obvious difference between, like, Avatar, where I'm 100% sure James Cameron was not aware of that as a possible reading of his movie, and The Matrix, where The Matrix, in retrospect, being made by two trans women makes 100% sense, because, like, I think, like, as a cis person, if I watch The Matrix, I feel like I do learn something about being a transgender person, about, like, what experientially I think that's put into the art. I don't know. I couldn't make that connection with Avatar because I don't think that connection was intended. And that doesn't mean you can't have that in the movie. It doesn't need to be intended for that to be something you take out of it. So this isn't me scolding anyone. It's just saying that, like, I just don't know if, like, the movie doesn't feel... And I feel like the movie isn't smart enough for that. And then also the offensiveness of what it's... Because transgenderism in the real world is not you hollowing out the body of someone else and taking it over, right? It's different. Like, Jake's actual body doesn't change. I think that's part of it. His actual body, I don't know what they do with it at the end. Do they burn it? Do they put it up as a scarecrow? Like, I don't know. It's just hollow, and he abandons it. And then there's an entire ableism going on here where, like, boy, this movie is just all in on the idea that if you don't have access to your legs, you're fucked, and you might as well go get a big blue body. And I don't know if that's a very nice thing to say to our disabled brothers and sisters.
Yeah, because it's like, it's not that I can't see the applicability of a, like, trans reading to those very narrow elements of the story, but I think it's for me, it's way too deeply embedded in the very overbearing Native American, like, white guilt allegory to really extract it from that. Like, not to say that you can't, but I can't. Like, I can't really do that to find that of value in this movie because it's so deeply embedded. The movie is so specifically about this fantasy of what if you could rid yourself of that guilt? What if you could rid yourself of this feeling that you are part of, like, one of the bad guys, and that everything, like, your body and your experiences and what you've done is a part of that. And the movie is so about that it doesn't even really want to go to the darkness of having the main character be very specifically implicated. Even though everything about the character tells you that he is. Again, he's a fucking Marine. He fought in Venezuela. Like, everybody's coded as being vaguely American. Like, I know Sam Worthington is in real world, he's Australian, but he's using an American accent in the movie. They're clearly meant to be read as American characters. And last time I checked, Venezuela wasn't part of the fucking United States of America. So clearly whatever the fuck he was doing was a part of some sort of, like, military imperial attack on Venezuela or something of that nature. But the movie never engages with that enough to actually, like, warrant being able to try to absolve that character of those guilts. So it wants to just indulge in that fantasy so thoroughly to where he is removed from it completely and literally gets to physically transform into a Na'vi and leave behind the husk of, like, all of the rest of that baggage. But that's just a fantasy. And it's too, I think, uncomfortable a fantasy for me to really want to indulge in. Like, you can't leave behind the husk of your complicitness in the American military industrial complex if you're American. We've paid our fucking taxes. We have the blood of children on our hands. Like, that's what it is to be complicit in that, because this kind of imperialism isn't a thing that just happened, hundreds of years ago to the Native Americans. It's stuff that is happening to the Native Americans today. It's something that America and other industrialized countries around the world are doing all the time. So, like, the fantasy to me is a fundamentally wrong one to even attempt to be indulged. And for this movie to indulge it so thoroughly at the end that he is literally physically transformed and thus doesn't have any of those sins anymore, has never had to actually confront them, has never had to deal with them, and he just gets to walk away from that and move on with his life. It's a fucked up notion, and I really don't like it.
Yeah, and Dances with Wolves actually is a good comparison point here, because I have not seen the movie in a while, but I'm looking at the plot summary, because my memory is that it does, like, Avatar goes way further with it than Dances with Wolves. Like, Dances with Wolves, he does get the Native American name, he marries, I say Native American, it's the Sioux tribe specifically, and he marries a Sioux woman, and he is accepted as one of them. But then at the end of the movie, he doesn't become the leader of the Sioux. Yeah. That is one of the most offensive things in Avatar, is he literally becomes he gets fucking Neytiri's brother or fiance killed, and then he just becomes the leader of the Na'vi, which, one, on just a political sense, feels stupid of the Na'vi. That feels like they should get someone more experienced in that job. And two, extremely offensive. So, one, John Dunbar in Dances with Wolves does not become the head of the Sioux, which would also just be like a historical imposition that would be fucked up, right?
Yeah.
And then also, the ending of the movie is intentionally bittersweet, because the army is hunting him, and because Dunbar knows they know what he looks like, he can't be with the Sioux. And so he and his wife leave, and they don't live together with the Sioux anymore. And then it's an ambiguous ending of, like, we don't know what happened to them. And then the movie also ends reminding you that the Sioux were ultimately kind of destroyed as a nation within the United States, shortly after where this movie takes place historically. And so it does ground you in, the movie does not allow you as a viewer to forget your white guilt at the end, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas in this movie, hey, Jake and all his white friends get together and they kick the military off the planet. They're gone. No more white people. Yay! And now he's the head of the tribe. His white body is gone. They're gonna go put that in the fucking furnace. And he's blue and he never has to worry about it again. It makes Dances with Wolves look like the most progressive movie ever made.
Yeah, it does, like, when you look back at that, like, that oft sort of referred kind of almost like catchphrase for the movie amongst the audience of, like, oh, it's Dances with Wolves with blue cat people. It was a sentence you heard a lot in 2009. It is offensive to Dances with Wolves. It's like, don't put that shit on that movie. Like, that's not fair. That movie's got its problems, but come on, like, it's not this. Because it's this movie is, like, deeply racist. Like, a thing I thought was very funny is I looked up, because obviously these criticisms are not original. This is not this only comes up upon reassessing Avatar. You have now discovered Avatar is racist. This was, like, widely discussed at the release of the movie. But there was some stuff of when I was looking, because I was curious to read some of the criticism at the time. I did see a lot of articles that were phrased of, like, is Avatar racist? Yes or no? Question mark. And I kept on looking at those and, like, yeah, it's pretty racist. And it was, like, a lot of people being like, yeah, it's probably kind of racist, but the effects were good, was a thing I saw from a lot of articles that I kind of skimmed over. But when the effects, aren't, when you're not seeing it in 3D at the movie theater and all that stuff for the first time, like, I can kind of see how on a first viewing you wouldn't have fully engaged with it enough to give a very committed answer to the question, is this movie racist? But that is the thing when you get to reassess it with clear eyes and, away from hype and all that stuff, and you've seen it before, it's very easy to very definitively say, yeah, this movie's racist. Like, its attitude towards the Na'vi is racist. The fact that it doesn't give them the credit of having, like, a history is racist, right? They don't get to be historical entities. They just are a people that you visit. They are no different than the trees or, like, the weird six-legged fucking leopards in that kind of shit. They are just one of those things. They don't get the benefit of being a POV character in any way, shape, or form. They don't get the benefit of feeling like they get to have, like, the range and complexity of personality and like humanity that you would give to a human character. Now, this movie doesn't give it to a lot of people, but it particularly doesn't give it to the Na'vi. And it's not, it just, the movie doesn't feel curious or interested in the Na'vi. It feels like it's something where the idea of being them is attractive. It's like, it's nice to fantasize about the idea of being a Na'vi, in the way that if you're someone who is saddled with white guilt, it is like nice to imagine yourself as being black. You know, like I can say that in the sense of like when I was growing up, I was a part of a basketball team, and like that attitude of like where every single kid on my basketball team was white, because I grew up in the suburbs of fucking Golden, Colorado. But like the culture of that, the attractiveness, the idea of imagining yourself as being black and into hip hop and basketball and a part of that culture that was a very black culture, like that's a very common thing. But that idea, and particularly when you pursue it particularly far, is such an act of cultural imperialism. It's such an act of like wanting to both be able to maintain the white privilege that you benefit. You don't want to adopt any of the struggles of that identity. You just want to feel cool, because it is cool to be black, or it is cool to be Native American, or it's cool to be Hispanic, or whatever, and to put on that costume and that hat and to play it for a day. And that's the attitude that this movie has towards everything related to the Na'vi. It's not interested in delving into like a depth of their culture or history or the depth of their personality. It's interested in their main character getting to wear that hat and run around and play Native American, and play cowboys and Indians, basically. And then at the end of the day, get to be their fucking chieftain. He literally becomes their leader. It is the most literal white savior fucking narrative I have ever seen. Like, most white savior narrative tropes, like with Dances with Wolves, is not so extreme as this, to where he becomes their chieftain, where he is told this, like, thing of Neytiri's grandfather's grandfather, like, rode the last shadow, and it's the greatest the flying creature in the whole forest, and was able to band the tribes together. And then Jake Sully is able to do it, and you don't even see how he does it. He's just like, oh, it's the baddest thing in the sky. Let me jump on the back of this thing, and the camera will cut, and then it just cuts back to he's already mastered it, and he just lands there. It's like, oh, now I'm blah, 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 and I'm the leader of the sky, and I'm he who rides the last shadow, not you, Neytiri, the person who's descended from the last person who did this, the person whose father was the chieftain, the person whose father was the chieftain that died, and like 2 or 3 seasons ago you were handed like the ceremonial bow that represented you being the leader of this tribe. Not you, Neytiri, it is me. Jake Sully is the one that has earned the ability to ride the last shadow and be the leader of the tribe. This movie is deeply fucking racist.
I want to follow up on all that, and 1, I agree with all of it. 2, I want to just quickly read the narration from that scene where he captures, like, the big pterodactyl thing, because it's the other piece of worst dialogue in the movie. Outcast, betrayer, alien. I was in the place the eye does not see. I needed their help, and they needed mine. But to ever face them again, I was going to have to take it to a whole new level. The way I had it figured, Taruk's the baddest cat in the sky. Nothing attacks him, so why would he ever look up? That was just a theory. Cut to black. No, not cut to black. Sometimes your whole life boils down to one insane move. Then cut to black. Oh my god, how did James Cameron not... He's smarter than that. I know for a fact he is smarter than that dialogue.
Yeah, it's like, is he going to tame, like, this ancient creature and become leader of the Na'vi, or is he going to, like, do a sick trick off of a half pipe? I can't tell based on the way that is written, you know? Like, it's fucking...
That sounds like what your character in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 would say, but as the countdown is going,
yes.
3, 2, 1, time to take it to a whole new level.
Yeah, it's like, and then you get a fucking Mountain Dew, and you do a 780 off a half pipe. Like, it's fucking... It's nuts the way that character's written. And again, like, the thing he is doing is becoming leader of their tribe, and it's written in the most, like, dude bro way possible. And it cannot be stressed enough how crazy it is that Neytiri is not the person to lead the tribe, with how much it sets it up for her. It's so much. The thing it reminds me of, because we did the podcast on it recently, was the 2003 Full Metal Alchemist with the Winry character, where in that instance it's an adaptation of a manga where this female character is, like, really important and has a lot of really important stuff in the manga. And the anime adaptation takes a lot of those scenes. It does some of the setup for it, but then it takes all the meat of it and then gives it to a different character. This is what that feels like. It feels like there's some alternate universe version where all that setup for Neytiri's character led to a payoff, and then in this version they just said, let's just take that payoff, rip it away from her, give it to a different character, but not remove any of the setup that would have led to that payoff in the first place. It's nuts.
Okay, following up on is this movie racist, which I think you gave a very good answer, Sean, for 100% yes. Here's an alternate version of that answer, Sean. Let's think about the actors in this movie. Mm-hmm. So, who are the actors who play our lead Na'vi characters? There's 4 lead Na'vi in the movie. There's Neytiri, there's Moat, the like spiritual leader priest, that's Neytiri's mother. You have Etukan, who is the clan leader, and you have Tsute, who is the warrior who is he's like betrothed to Neytiri and he dies. Okay, Zoe Saldana plays Neytiri. She's black, she's Dominican and Puerto Rican. You have CCH Pounder, famous African-American actress. You have Wes Studi as Etukan. He is one of the most famous Native American actors in American history. He's Cherokee. He got an Academy Award for Dances with Wolves. He is famous for this. And then Tsute is played by an actor named Laz Alonso, who is also black. So all of the Na'vi are black or Native American or otherwise people of color in the American context. Then let's talk about our lead characters on the human side. You have Jake Sully, played by Australian Sam Worthington. You have Colonel Miles Quattrich. That is the best thing in the movie is his name. Is Stephen Lang, white. Sigourney Weaver, white. Giovanni Ribisi, white. Joel David Moore, white. And the one they didn't fuck this up with is Michelle Rodriguez is in fact Latina. Also Michelle Rodriguez somehow stranded here with some of the worst dialogue in the movie. I know Michelle Rodriguez is a fun actress. You wouldn't know it watching this because it's a terrible performance that I don't think is her fault, because I've seen the Fast and Furious movies. She can do cheese very good. Not in this movie. My point being, they cast all but one of the humans as white, and they cast all the Na'vi as black or indigenous. They don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. It's people in mocap, and it's humans in the future. There is no intrinsic reason, especially if you were aware of the possible racial critiques of this movie and you wanted to fight against it. There's no intrinsic reason. There's the extrinsic money reason because Hollywood is racist. But there's no intrinsic reason Jake Sully can't be black. There's no reason he can't be Asian or Latino or something else. There's no reason he has to be white for this story, and you could actually complicate the dynamics of this movie pretty rapidly by doing something with that. Mm-hmm. There's no reason why all the other humans have to be white. The reason to do that is if you had an actual critique of the imperialism to mount, but because the movie doesn't, it just reads as extra racist to me, which is that there's a lot of black actors in this movie, but there is no black skin in this movie. Because all the black actors are mocapped into blueface. Mm-hmm. But all the white skin remains. And some of the white skin, of course, gets to be transformed into blue skin. That feels like, again, I don't think that's a conscious James Cameron went down a list and said, no black people in my movie unless they're in mocap. But clearly there is a thoughtless, knee-jerk, and naive feeling that like, oh, okay, well, we're coding them all as Native American. Let's get all racial minorities. And again, they only got one actual Native American actor in there with Wes Studi. Then it is all black actors playing the Na'vi. That just feels deeply wrong and offensive to me.
Yeah, it is, and it's one where like any kind of deflection of the racial dynamics of the movie because the Na'vi aren't literally Native Americans feels like a very easy thing to point. Like it's that's a very thin way to try to divert any criticism because it's very obvious to say with the casting what the dynamic is here, and what the thought process or lack of thought process that went in with that. It's also notable when you run it down like that, how like there are twice as many non-Na'vi characters as there are Na'vi characters, even though like it feels like the majority of the screen time is with the Na'vi. Like in actuality, there are very few Na'vi characters in the movie. And most of them like get a couple of lines of dialogue. Neytiri is the only one who gets any like meaningful dialogue in the film for the Na'vi side. So that's
I think where it really pissed me off is I was watching the end credits and it's going through the cast and I saw CCH Pounder and I went, wait, CCH Pounder was in this movie? Because I would think I would recognize her. She's a beloved character actress. Mm-hmm. She's awesome. And then I looked at the credits. I'm like, oh, she was Moat. She was the spiritual leader who I don't think ever speaks English in the movie, and so and also like doesn't look as much like her real world counterpart as some of the other avatars. Like I think like obviously Neytiri is made to look very much like Zoe Saldana. I don't know if Moat is made to look as clearly like CCH Pounder. So it just feels like a total waste of this great actress. And it's like there's just something knee jerk in me went, that's offensive. I don't like this.
Yeah, that they're just like not given material to play. You know, the Na'vi just again,
Yeah.
the thing the movie is interested is in a kind of like exotic tourism. You know, like I mean the stuff you said like really early in this conversation about like some of the best sequences of the movie, which is like Jake running through the forest and then him and Neytiri exploring this area. Like all that stuff is like at the level of like the original King Kong movie. Like when it's playing in that space, the movie's like pretty adept because it's like that's a very comfortable place. And you know another movie that's really fucking racist? The original King Kong. I like that movie a lot. That movie's racist as shit. It's also, you know, like 80, 90 years old at this point. So it's easier to look past the racism because basically almost everybody, if not everybody involved in the making of that movie is dead at this point. It's not easy to look past the racism in Avatar, you know, which was released in 2009. And the fact that it like is, again, when it just gets to be King Kong and kind of it gets to not even try to play with any of that dynamic, it feels like that's where the movie is most comfortable and adept at itself.
Yeah. And, you know, and it's like the Wes Studi thing, man. Wes Studi is one of the greatest living actors. When you give him the right material, he's just a phenomenal actor. And there is something offensive about, like, hiring him for Avatar. And it's like, just do the Dances with Wolves thing, but we're gonna put blue CGI on you. And he doesn't even have nearly as much to play as he had in Dances with Wolves. So it is using Wes Studi as this empty signifier of authentic Native Americanness. It just feels dirty. It feels wrong. It feels like, you know, you could complicate that. You could have Wes Studi playing one of the scientists. He could be the Sigourney Weaver character, and she could be playing one of the Na'vi, and then everything's scrambled a little bit, and there's something interesting going on here. But no, we didn't do that.
No, yeah, and that's like just kind of the whole thing with the story of this movie is you do see lots of potential. You know, there's like a lot of interesting ideas here. But it would have to be really radically transformed. But again, if it had the thing that got us into this conversation in the first place was like if it had that end of the second act twist where you found out, oh, like the avatars is wrong. Like making them is effectively you are creating and killing a person. And then you're carving out like a living entity and you're putting someone else's soul in it. This is really fucked up. And that for the last act of the movie, if the Jake Sully character no longer could be in the Na'vi body, but found a way to be heroic and save the day as who he is, and in his normal body, and like if you found that and that he was able to work with them, you know, if like Zoe Saldana's character, if Neytiri got to see the human body of Jake Sully for more than be like the last 5 minutes of the movie, like I didn't remember when that moment was. And I was like really surprised that it came so late because it feels like you're not able to do anything interesting with the dynamic of her having fallen in love with somebody but it being him puppeting this other body. Like there should be something you can do with that dynamic, whatever your narrative perspective on it is. But having him like working with them in his human body and working with the Na'vi fighting against other humans, I think would have made for a much more visually and narratively interesting final act of the movie that would have given you a lot of different elements to play with, both just thematically, but also visually, it would have given you something else to do. And it's, I think, a big, huge missed opportunity of this film that it just goes for the most standard conventional way to deal with everything in its plot.
Yeah. What if Jake's hero's journey was not becoming a Na'vi, but learning it's wrong to become a Na'vi, and instead being the best human he can be, and maybe coming into some leadership position where he finds a way to live peacefully with the Na'vi to the benefit of both societies, right? Like, which should actually be the goal of societies meeting in the world, right?
Yeah, that you don't have to like abandon. Like you he needs to understand their ideology. Like that's the thing he needs to understand. He doesn't need to understand their physical body. He needs to come to see like the way they see the world and like the moral and ethical framework that is a better framework than he has been living his own life with. Like, that's what he needs to learn. It's a philosophical thing. It's not a physical thing. He doesn't need to transform his body. The transforming of the body is like, should be a distraction point with the way that the movie has set up its framework here. But instead, it becomes the primary thing. There's very little emphasis put on actually him having to unlearn a bad framework that he had coming in from the beginning of the movie, because he had no framework. Again, they basically present him as a blank slate character. So he should have to unlearn that shit and then actively learn like this other framework, and that's not a thing that he needs to be an avatar for. He can be Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, and still learn to see the world the way the Na'vi see the world and fight for the same things that they fight for. He doesn't need to be a big blue person to do that.
Yeah. No, obviously. Yeah, it's very true. There's a lot of potentially good story elements here, and it really does, at the end of the day, feel like Cameron had to cobble a script together to justify all these cool technical things they wanted to do, and he just kind of went with Hollywood greatest hits, and then it kind of amped it up to 11, and we end up with an oops all allegory that does not work. It's horrifying. Oops all horrifying allegory. This is definitely a movie where I think J.R.R. Tolkien's essay about the essay is not just about allegory, but his piece from that essay about where he writes about how much he distrusts and dislikes allegory. I'm like, yeah, this is the kind of thing that makes J.R.R. Tolkien seem really wise and prescient.
Yes, yeah, I definitely agree that this is one of those where it's like you need to strip the metaphor away a little bit. Like, you need to, which is like it's like a very common thing in sci-fi fantasy, is that you start with this sort of fantastical element that at first seems good or positive, but then at the end of the second act you learn, oh, really, this fantasy is a bad fantasy, and it's a thing we have to like remove ourselves from and get rid of, like the Matrix is a bad thing. Like, let's not use it,
Yeah.
Like, it's not only is it very common, it's kind of the dominant plot structure in most sci-fi fantasy movies, is about how either you have to or inevitably you will lose whatever that fantastical thing is. And it feels like it's a thing that Avatar should be setting itself up for, and it just doesn't do it.
No. What else is there to say about this movie? I think we've picked it apart pretty thoroughly. Let's say one nice thing. The James Horner score is great. Mm-hmm. James Horner, I miss him dearly. Phenomenal film composer, obviously. It's another element of the movie where I listen to it and I go, oh, God, we don't get him like that anymore.
Yeah.
Honestly, the score is better at telling the story than the story is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is a great score. The big mech fight at the end is fantastic. We can't, that's the Weekly Suit Gundam people. We can't do this movie without at least mentioning how cool the mech is at the end. My favorite part of this movie, from what I remember in the theater, was him taking the giant fuck off mech knife, and fighting with that. It is like, that part is fantastic. And again, it's a movie that if you turn your brain off and you just ignore all the stuff we spent the majority of this conversation talking about, it's a very enjoyable movie, and that's, to me, the most enjoyable part. There's lots of great action throughout. That's the best action piece. It's maybe, tells you a lot about the movie, how much it feels super invested in the Stephen Lang character and making him seem very tough and cool. While no, obviously they're always telling you, like, he's a bad guy, but look how cool he is. Look how cool and tough this bad dude is. It's kind of telling. But it is very cool. At the end of the day, if that was your mission, they accomplished that part of the mission. Was that the most important thing to do for this movie? No. But at least I could still enjoy it.
No, the mech is great. Stephen Lang, you can't knock that performance. Mm-hmm. It's a great Stephen Lang performance. It kind of reintroduced, he had been a character actor, but definitely got him a lot of new work and stuff, like he's in Don't Breathe. And he's an awesome actor. He's great in this. I love that whole final fight. That stuff works. It's, James Cameron is James Cameron. He's really good at that kind of stuff. It's all the other stuff wrapped in here where it just feels like this movie is James Cameron at his most in his element and his most out of his element. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, this movie has a lot of what James Cameron is best at, and I think James Cameron, the thing that he probably should not be trusted with is complex racial allegory. I just don't... Not because I think he's like I don't think he's out there in like a fucking KKK uniform. I just think he's probably a pretty generic white guy who doesn't think that deeply about this stuff. And that alone is not the worst crime in the world, but maybe then don't make a movie about it, right?
Yeah, like it's a lot easier to do, your like Vietnam metaphor thing with aliens, which is a thing that's like much more in his wheelhouse that you can do.
Yes.
Whereas this is like, there's really nothing about James Cameron that tells you that this is a story that he should be telling, Yeah. And it leads to a thing with the end of the movie that I don't know, Jonathan, how you felt coming out of it, but like when I got to the end of the movie, I was just fascinated with the sense of like, what the fuck is the plot of a sequel? Like, what do you do? Like, is there more story to be told? Like, there's nothing at the end of this movie that sets up a sequel at all. There's no room, really. There's nothing to be done with a sequel. I have absolutely no idea what the plot of this sequel is going to be based on rewatching this movie 2 nights ago.
Well, here's the thing. I actually am... excited is too strong a word. I'm looking forward to Avatar 2, one, for the sense that it looks genuinely like next level gorgeous from the trailers, but also like I think a Avatar movie that has all the technical acumen, James Cameron's direction, all the good stuff, but maybe is able to tell a story like all the baggage of Avatar 1, we're past that, we told that story, we're free to do something new. I think there's potential for something pretty good there. It just depends on what story they tell. If it's a redux of this where it's humans versus aliens, we don't need that. If it's all on Pandora and it's about like intra-Pandora conflict, I think there's a lot of like upside there. I think there's potential for a lot. The line I've heard about the sequel is that it is about Jake and Neytiri and their family going on a quest across Pandora to like meet the water tribes and something going on there. And again, if it is... like, if the humans are, like, a background or non-existent element to it, I think there's potentially a lot that you could do there. Cameron did not write these sequels alone, I should say. There has been a lot more work done on the sequels, on the story for the Avatar sequels than was ever done on the story for Avatar 1, and I think Cameron would probably be the first person to tell you that. He set up a writer's room years ago that is him... Josh Friedman, who is the guy who wrote the Terminator TV show, by the way, Rick Jaffa, Amanda Silver, they wrote the first of the new Planet of the Apes movies, and Shane Salerno, and they all together had a big writer's room where they plotted out these series of sequels that are coming up, and then each of them took point on one of the scripts, and then the final writing credit for each one will be written by James Cameron and one of those 4 groups. And I don't know. I think that maybe having a bunch of other those are all very talented names I just said in terms of writers. I think having a talented group of writers and they have spent like a decade plus writing these movies, maybe there's a good version of Avatar coming in these sequels. That's the thing I'm maybe looking forward to.
Yeah, I have no idea what it is. Like, there's nothing in this movie that sets up an idea of a sequel. The story of this movie is completely open and shut. I mean, obviously the main characters are still alive, but I don't even know why you would call it Avatar anymore, unless they do something with the plot to bring that back in. But Avatar is, like, that part's done. I did bring up the Wikipedia page just because I was curious if there had been anything released about the plot, and not really. And on the premise section for the Wikipedia page for Avatar 2 is the most generic blurb I've ever heard. I just want to read it out loud. Set in 2167, 13 after the events of the first film. I assume that's supposed to be 13 years. Avatar, The Way of Water, begins to tell the story of the Sully family, the trouble that follows them, the lengths they go to keep each other safe, the battles they fight to stay alive, and the tragedies they endure. Which is basically you saying, like, this sequel is going to tell a story. Is all that blurb is. This will have a story, and in the story there will be characters. Those characters will have trouble. They will try to help each other. They will have battles and tragedies. This is what the sequel will be about. So, obviously the movie will have a plot. This is not me saying that it doesn't have a plot, but I do find it funny that they seem very desperate not to tell anybody what the sequel is about, if that is the blurb. There is nothing you can gain from that blurb other than the time frame and the fact that the main characters from the last movie are going to be in it.
Most studio blurbs are like that, to be fair. There's something about it, them calling it the Sully family, where I'm like, either he should abandon his Earth name, Or like if Neytiri has a last name we don't know about, I think maybe he takes her name. Just, he took her fucking whole culture and body. Maybe he gets the name. I don't know. It's weird.
I like it. It's like they're just the Sullys, We're just I want them to live. They have like a white picket fence, They've got a little mailbox. All the other Na'vi live in these big trees, but he's just like wants to live in like Leave It to Beaver house. That's just where the Sully family lives.
Okay, last discussion. This is a movie that should, I feel like, be very enticing to like the entire fucking furry and hentai community. And I feel like other than the weird Fleshlight tie-in, which again was not an official tie-in, it has never been. There's all this design, and there is interesting stuff in here. It has never left any kind of cosplay mark, even though it is about big, sexy blue people with tails and ears. I've never seen like that sex thing online. I don't know. This movie just did not leave the kind of cultural imprint you would expect from a $3 billion grossing movie with seemingly a lot of elements you could play with for online fandom, but it never happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there is a fandom for Avatar, but there is not a prominent one, And I think for me, it's that there are no characters. Like, that's the thing that people get attached to. That's the thing that people become fans of. Like, that's what makes people really care about stuff. It is fundamentally why the MCU is super successful, is that they do the characters incredibly well. And it is the thing this movie does the worst. The worst part of this movie is its characters. So it doesn't matter if the rest of the design is really cool or interesting, because there is no gateway to get the audience emotionally invested. You can be, and people like this movie, this movie is entertaining. It's not that people don't like it, but it does not inspire people. And that's the thing that your big media properties that have those fandoms, or both big media properties and cult media properties that have their fandoms, do, is that they inspire people in some way, usually through a character, right? So the Doctor in Doctor Who, Luke Skywalker or Obi-Wan or Han Solo in Star Wars, Frodo, Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, like those characters in those big media franchises inspire people in some way. And even like it can be something super simple like the Master Chief in Halo. But you need some character that the audience can sort of grab onto as an entry point into this wider world, that then the rest of it is the thing that sparks your imagination. But like, I can't imagine how one would, for instance, write an Avatar fanfic. What space is there in Avatar to write a fan fiction? Like, there's nothing there. While there's technically an interesting world, there's nothing to happen in that world. Because the Na'vi aren't developed enough. They don't have a culture or history. There are no Na'vi characters you care about other than vaguely Neytiri. You only care about her because she's in the movie a lot, and Zoe Saldana is good. But there's nowhere for you to imagine other stories to be told. It's why I'm like shocked at the sequel, because I can't for the life of me imagine. If you handed me make a sequel to this movie, I would not be able to do it. I would just have to make something different, because there is no space to make a sequel. There's no other story to be told. And that's why you don't get the fandom. It doesn't spark the imagination. It doesn't have a character or group of characters that you can get inspired by or see yourself as in some way. And so all the like potential sexy Na'vi fan art that could have been made in an alternate universe just is not going to happen, because they're going to go to Sonic the Hedgehog, or they're going to draw a fucking crystal from that Star Fox game. At least that was the thing that happened back in the day. That was like the big furry thing, was that and Sonic. I'm sure that there is other stuff that the furry fandom will get into, Pokemon or whatever has you. But it's not going to be this, because there's nothing for them to have their imagination sparked by.
I think that is a astonishingly adept response to my question. You took it more seriously than I would have. What I did while you were giving that, and I'm being sincere, very good answer. That's the best answer about that I've heard, and I've seen that question posed online before. But what I did is I typed Avatar sex fanfic into Google. I got 4,820,000 results. Let's see. All of page 1 is about Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is about kids. I don't know what you kids... Okay, whatever. Little kids, whatever. All of page 2 is about Avatar: The Last Airbender. all of page 2. If you get to page 3, you get some really funny Avatar porn, including Avatar: The Last Jizz Bender, and you get a Avatar: The Silmarillion sex crossover, which is amazingly creative, I have to say. And it's only at the bottom of the 3rd page that you get anything about the James Cameron movie, which is an old Gizmodo article from 2010 pointing out that in the extended cut of Avatar, we learn that the way they have sex is that they put their like braids that have the like tentacles together, and they like connect. That wasn't in the theatrical cut because it was too close to penetrative sex, I guess, but they put those together. The problem is that is also how they connect to all the animals. So are they having sex with the animals when they ride them? Okay.
Yes.
It's all sex.
Yes. He has, it's a very, polyamorous society. They don't get into it too much, but it's, anything goes. Don't think too much about like what that means in terms of taming horses that you're riding. There's a very uncomfortable sexual dynamic there that we really, shouldn't think too deeply about. But yes, that does mean he is having sex with the giant pterodactyl every time he flies it.